Many homes have been given the title of Demon House, many of which I have covered here on this channel. But this house, out of all of them, has truly earned the moniker. From the time the soil was dug up during the Victorian era, a curse seemed to be placed upon the land. And when you combine terrible happenings with occult rituals, it's truly a recipe for disaster, the results of which have produced a cornucopia of paranormal activity within this now infamous Indiana home. This is the untold story of the frightening Monroe Demon House. Join me as I attempt to uncover its supernatural secrets. With the ever-changing algorithmic favor of YouTube, please, if you enjoy my content, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. Thank you all. Information available on this property is scarce at best, but I have done my best to find out as much as I could to try and provide you with the most cohesive picture possible. Hartford City, Indiana, what was started as a small log cabin settlement, continued to grow and eventually hit the big time in the late 1880s, where itself and its neighbors entered a natural gas boom, resulting in many factories being created during industrialization. Factories that produced textiles, glass, and other goods. But although natural resources were widely abundant within the ground there, something else seemed to inhabit the soil. Our story begins at the construction site of a rather unsuspecting looking Victorian home. The year is 1892, and the Berger family, who immigrated to the area from Belgium, had been successful in their business endeavors, and thus thought a new home in their new country would be the ultimate earthly reward. However, the family's newfound happiness would be all but short-lived. From the time the earth was dug up and the new home erected, within months, John Berger, the patriarch of the family, would die from tuberculosis within its walls. Mourning his death, this would be far from the last tragedy his family would endure moving forward. Shortly after John's death, a fire would mysteriously start in the upstairs level of the house, in time destroying a large portion of the property, and the majority of the Berger family would meet a truly gruesome and terrible fate. Following the horrific fire that torched what little happiness the Berger family had left, the widow of the family and one surviving child desperately needed a source of income. So the widowed Mrs. Berger decided to start renting out rooms in order to make it. There would be various tenants, but the most prominent were the Myers family. The head of the household, a man named Ulysses Myers, was a well-known and respected member of the community. He was known for his kindness, compassion, and for being an all-around amazing family man. But this reputation would soon fade. Shortly after moving into the home, Ulysses slowly began to change. Those who knew him believed that he had done a complete shift in his entire personality, all just within months. So much so that he became unrecognizable, not only to his close friends, but to his family as well. His kindness, compassion, and care all seemed to have been buried, and someone new now greeted them each day behind the eyes of Ulysses. He quickly became prone to fits of rage and insanity. This led him to become abusive towards his once beloved family, verbally as well as physically. These new bursts of rage, however, weren't reserved strictly for his family though. He soon turned on friends and colleagues too. This sudden heel turn for Myers led him to losing his job after an altercation at his workplace. And shortly after this, despite how much he had cherished his family before, he stole what was left of his family's money and abandoned his wife and children by skipping town with a newfound mistress. All of which was the polar opposite of the man that they thought they knew. Shattered beyond repair, the Myers family were left with open wounds upon their hearts and confusion in their minds. The only differing factor from their life before to what it was now was the fact that they had moved into this house. Now, with the home claiming the destruction of two families, rumors quickly began to spread locally throughout Hartford City that the house contained some kind of curse. Whether it was upon the property or the land was uncertain. The Myers family soon moved out, and due to the rumors, Mrs. Berger was unable to keep tenants to help support her and her surviving child. Thus, she was forced to sell the property at a fire sale rate in order to start somewhere new. What happened to the Bergers is unknown. With this sale, a revolving door of tenants and owners would begin. As soon as one family would move in, they would almost immediately move out. Again and again, this cycle would continue. It would go from being lived in by a family to being rented out and built onto, eventually creating its triplex design that we know today. Those who had moved in and out often reported experiencing bizarre activity, and others simply just didn't say anything, possibly not wanting to come to grips with the reality of what they had been through. This ever-changing list of tenants would continue for decades. Along with this revolving door of people came a revolving door of peculiar behaviors and practices. Rumors began to circulate in the late 1980s and into the early 1990s that tenants during this time frame were performing occult rituals and ceremonies within the home, particularly within the basement. Black magic rituals and ceremonies. Those conducting them attempted to harness the negative energy that dwelled there, to conjure a demon to do their bidding. Although information is limited, one could assume that perhaps their efforts were successful. From the mid-90s onward, the strangeness that surrounds the house on Monroe Street only intensified, with new stories coming from new tenants and neighbors alike. Stories that this old Victorian home housed a dark and malevolent force. These stories soon began to spread like wildfire. Those who would move into the house typically would only last in the home a year or less. They often fled in the middle of the night, with nothing but the clothes upon their backs, only continuing to solidify that something evil dwelled within the house. Things in fact got so bad that even when the home was abandoned for a time, the windows would be blacked out in order to keep people from looking inside. But not because of vandalism problems, but due to so many neighbors and passerbys calling the police, claiming that they kept seeing shadowy figures walk around the interior of the Monroe house. With the home providing a plethora of paranormal evidence and experiences, this soon drew the attention of paranormal scholars and investigation groups from all over the country. This is just some of the activity said to have been experienced by various groups over the years. People have reported a vast amount of supernatural happenings, many of which have been caught on film, photo, or digital audio recording. These range from aggressive and insulting EVPs or electronic voice phenomena to full-bodied apparitions, shadow figures, and possibly inhuman manifestations. Mysterious sounds like knocking, banging, and footsteps are common, doors and cabinets slamming shut with incredible amounts of force. And most of the activity seems to be centered around the basement, as well as the top floor. And the top floor is speculated to be the place where the fire had started that engulfed the Berger family. The basement, of course, is where the alleged black magic rituals took place. In both of these locations, an eerie, shadowy specter of an old malicious woman is said to attack people. But just who could this entity be? Someone who had previously lived there? Or something inhuman cloaking itself in some kind of familiar skin? Stories of groups panicking and fleeing, too, have become commonplace. One paranormal group, which wishes to remain anonymous, in 2014 had such a disturbing experience that they fled the home in fear for their lives. They arrived on site at the Monroe house amidst a strong thunderstorm. Unpacking their vehicle, attempting to keep their equipment dry and safe, they made their way inside and in due time began documenting whatever they could find there. As they investigated, asking questions, provoking interaction, and recording level by level, the more activity they began to experience. Shadows moved out of the corner of their eyes. Bangs, knocking, and cabinets slamming shut could be discerned from the reverb of the thunder outside. But it's when they decided to go down to the basement that their lives would be altered forever. As they descended the stairs, an eerie cold began to overtake them. As they asked their questions, attempting to catch any activity they could, their flashlights and devices failed. Left with only the enveloping darkness, with the occasional flash of lightning coming through the basement windows, something appeared to them that caused them to flee immediately. But just what or who was this apparition? This cannot be confirmed. Whatever it was terrified them so much that they fled into the torrential downpour and refused to ever return. Later, when asked for details, even separately, the members of the group thus far have refused to discuss the incident further. Whether this is out of fear for whatever this thing is or was, re-entering their lives, or the mere thought is so reality-shattering, one cannot be sure. This incident and its aftermath truly makes you wonder just what they could have saw within the dilapidated, damp basement that accursed night. Investigations would continue with multiple groups coming in and out, until a very peculiar discovery took place in 2016. And this discovery would lead to much speculation as to what could have happened within the house. While conducting an investigation for their show Paranormal Lockdown, Nick Groff and Katrina Weirdman found themselves in the basement and were slowly being drawn to the crawl space of the house. As they traversed the damp darkness, what they would find would alter the story forever. Located within the crawl space were human remains, bones buried in a shallow grave. This freaked the entire crew out and prompted them to stop filming and to call the police immediately. From here, a full-scale investigation would be conducted and the remains excavated and sent to a local coroner there in Indiana for further examination. The bones were indeed confirmed to be human and were, quote, at least 100 years old, possibly older. Following the coroner, they were sent to Indiana University for further testing to determine the age and identification of the person. At this point, the final outcome has not yet been reported, such as the age of the individual found, or their identity, or potential cause of death. The presumed investigation is still underway. This put a brief pause on people being allowed to enter the now privately owned home. But that pause has since been lifted, with many more investigations taking place over the years since. And with these investigations, even more paranormal activity, and aggressive activity at that, has been reported. These investigations also range from amateur to professional, from the average Joe to YouTubers and famous paranormal teams. Those who have entered the walls of the Monroe Demon House have experienced, in addition to previously mentioned activity, strange sights, smells, and feelings, demonic snarls, growls, and even full-blown attacks have happened, and these have involved scratching, biting, and being shoved. Oftentimes, these more intense manifestations are accompanied with aggressive and commanding EVPs, where people's names are often used. Windows slamming shut with so much force that they shatter, leaving fragments of glass all over the floor, just like the fragments left of the lives of the families who once dwelled there, has also happened. One previous owner of the home allegedly even jumped out a window on the top floor upon being attacked by a demonic apparition. Imagine that for a moment. You're so terrified that you would rather risk diving through a window at the top of your house, breaking it ultimately, let alone falling however far and injuring yourself out of pure fear and fight or flight, instead of dealing with whatever this thing was that was attacking you, rushing towards you. That to me is bone-chilling. Others who have stayed more recently have also reported puddles of strange liquid throughout the house at varying times and with seemingly no origin. Horrific nightmares if they manage to sleep, and why you would ever choose to sleep there is beyond me. And even strange footprints or paw prints, such as this one, have also been discovered multiple times. So with all of these high strangeness manifestations, we must ask ourselves, just what is it that lurks within the Monroe Demon House? Could it have been a curse placed upon the land? Something that predated the building of the house? It's certainly possible, in my opinion. To somewhat back up that claim, Native American artifacts, such as arrowheads, have been found around the property, but nothing significant that would indicate some kind of a curse. No burial grounds or mounds, from what I could find. What if it was a generational or family curse? Again, it's possible, but seems somewhat unlikely from what I've seen. The Berger family, up until the home was built, had great success in their endeavors, and for all intents and purposes, seemed happy and thriving, until, of course, they weren't. Then there's the enigma of the Myers family. Did Ulysses Myers lose his mind due to the home? One could certainly make that connection, considering his complete shift in personality. But what was it in particular that caused him to change so drastically? This question, and more, we may never truly be able to answer. All we can do is speculate. Then, the numerous owners and tenants over the decades since the days of the Bergers and Myers, many of them reporting odd and often scary paranormal or poltergeist activity. Was this activity also taking place when the older families lived there? Or did it start after their departure? If this was the case, if it started afterwards, was it the result of negative events attracting something dark? Or was one of the families or family members involved in the occult? And speaking of occult, just who or what were those people in the late 80s into the early 90s doing? What kind of black magic or rituals were conducted? And were they responsible for conjuring some kind of entity into the home? Or did their practices just make the entire situation much worse? And did it have anything to do with the human remains that were found in the basement? And if not the Black Mages closer to modern times, someone in the early 1900s had to have known just who this person was and what happened to them. And of course, will the identity and cause of death ever be determined for the poor soul whose remains were found within the basement? As you ponder all of these questions and attempt to draw your own conclusions, I want to leave you with several final questions. Will the activity ever cease? And will the origin ever truly be determined? All of these questions honestly may not have answers. Perhaps they're out of our scope of understanding, or perhaps the answers have just simply been lost to the sands of time. But one thing I can say for certain is this. Given how many people have experienced dark and spine-tingling paranormal activity within this house, and taking into account how long it has been occurring, this is one home that has truly earned the name the Demon House. Because a demon is precisely what may just be lurking within its depths. Mere days after the Lee family had settled into their new abode, nestled amongst the pines, they are confronted with paranormal happenings. Initially, the disturbances seem harmless, as the couple's two young sons began to voice concerns about peculiar lights flickering in their rooms and eerie shadows dancing across the walls. But the situation takes an ominous turn when Steve and Beth themselves bear witness to disturbing and terrifying events. This is the untold story of the haunted house of the Black Forest in Colorado. There's an undeniable, almost supernatural call to the eerie and the unexplained that seems to emanate from the depths of dense woodlands. The Black Forest, a vast expanse of towering trees and shadowy undergrowth, has been a breeding ground for creepy tales of the otherworldly. Amidst this foreboding landscape lies a dilapidated house, its weathered walls and creaking floorboards harboring secrets that have captured the imagination of paranormal enthusiasts across the nation. This isolated dwelling, nestled deep within the Colorado wilderness, has earned a reputation as one of the most haunted sites in the United States. Its very existence a testament to the enduring power of mystery and the unknown. The region referred to as the Black Forest is an unincorporated area situated in El Paso County, Colorado, nestled near the city of Colorado Springs. This area was traditionally known as the Pineries, a vast expanse spanning over 1,000 miles, aptly named for the dense concentration of majestic ponderosa pine trees that blanketed the landscape. The Black Forest's remote and secluded nature, coupled with its towering evergreens and rugged wilderness, has long captivated those seeking solitude and a connection with the untamed beauty of nature. The secluded log cabin, nestled deep within the Black Forest region of Colorado, seemed like a tranquil oasis for the Lee family when they first laid eyes on it in 1991. Stephen and Beth, along with their two sons, had relocated from Louisiana, seeking a serene escape amidst the towering pines and pristine wilderness. The sparsely populated area, known for its slow-paced lifestyle, crisp air, and breathtaking vistas, promised a dream home surrounded by untouched nature. Little did they know that this idyllic retreat would soon become a source of inexplicable occurrences and unsettling experiences that would forever alter their perception of the supernatural. About the Lees. Stephen Lee, a father, husband, and truck driver, had done well for his family. And wanting a change of scenery, they found what they believed to be their dream home. A 6,000 square foot, 3-story cabin located within the Black Forest. Situated on 5 acres of land, Stephen and his wife Beth, with every step as they surveyed the property, could envision their 2 young sons playing and growing up there. Their own little piece of the American dream. So, it took a little bit of time, but their offer on the home was ultimately accepted, and within the coming months, they would soon call this secluded place home. However, they would fail to realize that it wasn't just inhabited by the family of 4. The first week at their new residence seemed like something out of a fairy tale. Mom, Dad, and the kids were all comfortable and very happy after making the long trek from Louisiana to Colorado. And the family themselves seemed happy and content with their decision. However, this would change. The Lees' 2 young sons shared a room, as brothers often do at a young age. And roughly after their first week, they began to tell their parents that something strange was happening in their bedroom. Bright, colorful lights flashed about, and terrifying, shadowy specters flowed across their walls. These strange happenings frightened the boys and often kept them awake. So of course, they told their parents. However, often in these situations, they were dismissed. Beth and Steve simply believed that the boys had overactive imaginations and figured it would just take time for them to adjust to their new environment. But this too would change mere weeks later. Upon coming home from an evening of fun as a family, they would arrive to see their home lighting inside with strange, lightning-like flashes of light. They could see the spectacle from their driveway. In the words of Beth, "One day we came home and it was like the 4th of July in our living room and bedroom. We had all sorts of colorful flashes of light seemingly everywhere. We rushed inside to figure out just what these things were, and simultaneously, it sounded like people were stomping across our roof. Then all of a sudden, it stopped." Never having seen anything like this before, the Lees were simply perplexed, and not sure of what to make of this activity. They would lay their heads down to sleep this night, but what they failed to realize is that this was just a prelude of what was to come. In the coming months, the activity grew in intensity. What started as phantom lights and flickering shadows had escalated into something taking place almost every single day. From disembodied banging sounds to whispers, the sound of chains dragging on the floor, or even inside the walls, to pushing, assaulting, and disturbing the family. Sadly, the Lee's young sons were more often than not the targets of this paranormal force that plagued them. Night after night, and almost every night, they were harassed by shadow people, the reappearance of the mysterious lights, and the awful banging sounds of something unseen. The family did their best to make the situation work. They, after all, were newly tied up financially in the purchase of what they believed was going to be their forever home. But it was something big or small nearly every day now that was taking place. During the day, appliances began to turn on and off on their own accord. This was attributed to an electrical issue at first, but after having the home examined by multiple electricians, they found no faulty wiring. Alongside electrical appliances, faucets began to turn on by themselves, often making a wet mess in whatever room they were activated in. During the night, the reemergence of the lights, the movement of the shadow people, and the sounds truly haunted them. And these disturbing happenings were soon coupled by something new and equally terrible. A noxious, chemical odor began to appear in the home with no rational origin. The smell of these mystery chemicals burned the nose, eyes, and throats of everyone whenever it appeared. In the coming days, yet more professionals would be called out, and yet nothing, no origin of the chemicals or detection of them either, could be found. It seemed that whatever force that dwelled within the walls of the cabin home in the woods had a particular hatred for the Lee family. And this force soon began to physically hit all of them, seemingly whenever it could, often leaving bruises. Not a believer in the paranormal, Steve Lee, having had professionals come out and not provide any rational answers to their strange ailments. This, coupled with the now daily torment that he and his family were enduring, had finally reached his wit's end. He wanted to prove that either there was someone or something messing with them. And over the coming year, he invested in a total of $70,000 worth of camera equipment and security equipment to monitor every square inch of their home and property. Now, you might think that that's an incredible amount of money to spend on cameras and alarm systems, and it is. But this was the 90s. The equipment wasn't as readily available or sophisticated as it is today, and it just goes to show that they were truly freaked out by whatever was taking place, that they wanted some kind of tangible proof that they could show the world so people didn't think that they were crazy. The cameras, which were mostly motion activated and would record when motion was detected, soon began to activate with no rational explanation and no physical means to be detected. After capturing several strange things on video and photograph, Steve decided to contact the local authorities for help. Records show that the El Paso police were contacted so often by the Lees in the months to come that they launched a formal investigation into just what was taking place at the cabin home in the Black Forest. During this time and the 2 years to follow, alongside the cameras, their security equipment, which could detect motion and forced entry, was triggered 62 times with no explanation as to what could be causing it. It wasn't faulty equipment or poor installation. It was oddly something else, something unexplainable. With not even the police able to rationalize what was happening to the Lees, Beth and Steve decided to take things one step further. They hired a private investigator. This was in part due to the police also growing tiresome of being contacted for assistance, and then there being nothing that they could do about it. Between the cameras and security equipment, and now hiring a private investigator, the Lees had all but spent the rest of their life savings. Most people, if it ever came to this, would simply try and cut their losses and sell the home. and we don't know if the Lees could have sold the home and moved elsewhere. But they truly still believed that this massive cabin home was their dream home, and they didn't want to give it up without a fight. Unfortunately, though, the private investigator was unable to help them. This left the Lees to simply tough out anything and everything that they had and were continuing to experience. After moving in 1991, the year now was 1995, and the activity had persisted despite the efforts of the Lee family to uncover just what was causing it. Steve, who still figured there had to be a rational explanation for what was taking place, had a little bit more of an open mind after a lengthy discussion with Beth. Seemingly having done everything else, the Lees concluded that they would try and contact paranormal investigators to see if they could do anything about the otherworldly happenings taking place in their home. After some research and calling numerous numbers, the Lees ended up getting in contact with the person who would end up being involved with the television show Sightings. Sightings was an American paranormal and news show that aired throughout the 1990s, covering various unexplained and fringe phenomena. As a result of this pretty lucky interaction, the show became very interested in producing an episode segment about hauntings surrounding the investigation of the Lee home. The show would contact a paranormal investigator and a self-proclaimed psychic in Minneapolis, Minnesota, named Echo Bodine. From her book, The Little Book of True Ghost Stories, Echo would explain her experience as the following. I got a call from the TV show Sightings, and they wanted to know if I would fly to Colorado Springs to help a family deal with some ghosts. The producers told me that the problem was the ghosts mostly seemed to come out at night, so I was asked to work from midnight until the early daybreak hours. It was a very hot day in mid-July when I arrived in Denver around 10 p.m. It was pretty eerie. There was intense lightning all throughout the sky and rain pouring down. I remember thinking how perfect the spooky weather was for investigating hauntings. Steve, the owner of the log home, was at the airport to pick me up. He was very open about not believing in ghosts, and as we drove through several towns in Colorado, I listened to him tell me story after story about some of the things that had gone on in their house. They heard voices, footsteps. Things would move from room to room. It took close to an hour to get up to their house in the mountains, and alongside the rain, a fog hung about 10 feet off the ground. When we arrived and I entered their 3-story log cabin home, from here I was greeted by a producer who asked me if I could take a seat while the scientist they had hired told us about his thermal camera. Having been tired from the trip, I laid my head back while the explanations were continuing, and suddenly I heard a voice come from behind me. It said, "Hey, come here." Upon turning around, I saw a large ghostly man. About 6 feet tall, the specter was wearing blue jeans and a blue checkered flannel shirt. I then heard in unison multiple voices tell me to look over here. And now there was 5 male spirits, all different, but dressed the same as the first. The original ghost said that his name was Tom, and that this was his house, and that no one was going to make him leave. He ran the show around here and had for a long time. I told the producer what was happening in case he wanted to capture anything for the segment, and he did. The conversation then ensued, with Tom explaining why he and the boys wanted to stay in the house, that it was his land, his home, and that he would not leave. One of the cameramen then asked if it was one of them who had been responsible for knocking over his very expensive camera off the countertop. All 5 in unison answered yes, and then disappeared out of sight. The scientist with the thermal camera did in fact capture a drop in temperature just right where Tom had stood. Around 2 a.m. in the morning, as me and Beth discussed the activity that she had experienced, the dogs the family owned would not stop barking outside. The producers, in an effort to keep their sounds from being picked up on the camera, tried to quiet them down, but simply weren't having any luck. Then, upon Beth showing me a photo of what they had captured on their own cameras, we suddenly were in the midst of 3 male spirits. One with a particularly angry scowl upon his face. One of them walked through both of us, causing us to jump out of our chairs, while the other, angry-looking spirit tried to take my breath away. I believe he did this to stoke fear from me in order to grow more powerful, and this worked because I felt as if I was being suffocated. By 3:30 a.m., we all decided to not focus on ghosts for a bit and to try and lighten the mood. We turned the cameras off and began eating some food in which Beth had prepared for us. But almost as soon as we began to relax, one of the camera women who had been sitting on the stairs began to hyperventilate. She then jumped up and screamed, "Get it out of me," as she fell down the stairs and onto the floor, writhing in pain. The producers asked for me to do something, so with the assistance of others, I helped her up and into a chair in the kitchen, and I began to burn sage, encircling her in the smoke. I asked her to say back to me that she was clear until she calmed down. It took about 20 minutes, but she eventually relaxed. She then was given a ride back to the hotel, and I never saw or heard from her again. By now it was 4:30 a.m., and we were waiting for the camera crew of the show to finish setting up their equipment in the bedrooms, where the majority of activity was seeming to take place. One of Steve's friends, who had been present most of the night, came up and handed me a brochure about the history of the local area. To my surprise, he told me that a man named Tom had been the sheriff here back in the 1800s. I felt shivers up my spine as I realized that this was the same Tom that now haunted the Lees' home. Roughly 5 a.m., as we set off to investigate the last bedroom, I walked into the room and saw there in the rocking chair in the corner who would turn out to be Beth's deceased grandmother. And on the opposite side of the room was Tom and the several male spirits under his control. We ended up burning sage and asking them all to move on to the other side. They all did leave the building, but I'm not convinced that they moved on. At about 6 a.m., we finally finished saging the entire house. Exhausted, we packed up our equipment and went back to our respective hotels. I've spoken to Steve and Beth since, and they informed me that activity at the cabin persisted shortly after our departure, and that although not fully convinced, Steve is convinced that there are things in this world that we will never truly understand. Sightings would do a follow-up episode segment years later with the Lees, where they brought in several spiritualists and an expert in hyperdimensional studies, and all would come to the conclusion that the home was indeed haunted. The expert would draw the conclusion that the home sat atop an interdimensional vortex, and coinciding with his conclusion, interestingly, a Hopi elder from the local area would also explain that the Black Forest sits on top what the Hopi call a rainbow vortex, a raging storm, a portal of sorts that contains great spiritual energy and the coming and going of many souls. Sometimes they burn out over time, and sometimes they don't. They are considered gateways between the world of the living and the spirit realm. Some strange and noteworthy things that took place during the second filming of the show's sightings at the Lees' residence was that a paranormal investigator had asked anyone if the name Howard bore any significance to them. The Lees were surprised because one of their best friends in Colorado Springs was a man named Howard. The entity then told the investigator, who relayed the information to everyone, that he was Howard's son, and that he in fact had not killed himself, but rather had been murdered. This disturbed the Lees a great deal because Howard's son had supposedly taken his own life by consuming deadly chemicals, working as a chemist. The stories and reputation of the home got such a local buzz from the press that even a Colorado senator by the name of Charles Duke visited the home with his own camera crew and would snap a few photographic pieces of evidence of apparitions, to his and everyone else's surprise. Senator Duke was so convinced of the Lees' haunting that he even contacted the FBI to conduct a formal investigation. But the Bureau would rebuttal with, no federal laws had been broken. Years later, after everything had happened, Steve Lee, who still wasn't fully convinced of the supernatural, came to his own conclusions as to what was taking place. And for the record, it's a wild theory. He began to believe that the government was using his family and their remote location to test biological agents and psychological weapons of war. He claims he has even photographed military personnel on his property with firearms, and claims that they may have been shutting off the electricity in his home so they could enter undetected. These claims, although far-fetched, would be incredibly disturbing if true, and it would account for the noxious odors the family said they were experiencing, as well as the lights and some sounds. But oddly enough as well, the Air Force Base is located just a few minutes away from where the Lees live. The Lees, as far as we know, after placing the home for sale in 2010, no longer live there. The current residents are unknown, but it seems as if the property has changed hands multiple times. Whether it was ghosts, the result of what the Hopi call a rainbow vortex, or more sinisterly, the result of government military black ops. The haunting of Black Forest, Colorado is truly an intriguing tale. And if you find yourself seduced by what you could consider your dream home, take caution, because this calling might just be a siren sound. Don't let them take you. In the sleepy farming town of Kelly, Kentucky, nestled within rolling hills and thick woods, an ordinary evening in August of 1955 unraveled into something extraordinary and horrifying. A farm stood as a modest haven amidst the rural expanse, its tobacco fields stretching under a cloudless, moonlit sky. That night, a family gathering had brought laughter and the comfort of kinship into a small farmhouse. But peace is a fragile thing, and in the quiet of night, it was shattered with a scream. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing the foremost authority on the Ghost and Me podcast, which is my new weekly podcast, of what has become known as the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins case, or encounter. Author Geraldine Sutton Stith, the daughter of Cecil Lucky Sutton, who was present and intimately involved with the encounter itself, I will link the full interview in the description, as well as at the end of the video, because it's truly a fascinating one, and one that I was honored to be a part of, along with my co-host Bob. With that being said, this video is a deep dive into the story itself, pulling from a variety of sources, but mostly Geraldine herself. Now, let us begin. The year was 1955, in a place called Kelly, Kentucky. Kelly, a small town by any standards, was especially small at that time, boasting about 150 residents or so, with the main occupation of them all being farming. It was here that Glennie Langford, the grandmother of Geraldine and the mother of Cecil, owned a small farm measuring about 27 acres in size. The family, along with most, were poor but proud farmers. They grew tobacco and had several livestock animals there on the farm. Living alongside Glennie was her son Jesse and his wife Elaine, who helped run the farm with their 3 children: Mark, age 12, Lonnie, age 10, and Mary, who was 7. Jesse had recently came home from the Korean War and hadn't been home longer than a year or so. Adjusting back to civilian life had been hard for him, but working on the farm and looking after his family certainly helped. The particular weekend just so happened to coincide with the visit of Cecil and his first wife, Vera, as well as their friends, Billy Ray and June Taylor, who were stationed in Evansville. They worked for a carnival at that time, and it just so happened to be near enough to visit. A break from work sounded nice, and who doesn't love some quality time with family and friends, alongside some home cooking? So they would drive to the farm and spend Friday and Saturday together, enjoying the weekend. That Sunday, with Monday and their inevitable return to work incoming, the family was doing their best to enjoy the time that they had left together. Glennie, who was a very religious woman who had gone to a church service earlier in the day, was returning home. Together, the family ate supper and started to play cards after they had finished eating. The family didn't have plumbing at the farmhouse, so Billy Ray had gone out to the well to get some water. Stepping outside with pail in hand, he soon hears something above him, something strange. There in the sky before him, he sees a silver, oval-shaped object with what he would later call the colors of the rainbow flowing behind it. Perplexed, he watches for a few seconds. The object, roughly 40 feet in the air or so, goes across the sky and then back behind the house itself and into the back field. It then slowly descends and lands in the back gully, going completely out of Billy Ray's sight. Not knowing what to make of what he had just seen, Billy Ray rushes into the house and starts telling everyone about what he had saw. Glennie tries to reason with him, telling him that he probably had just seen a shooting star, to which he would reply with, "No, I know what a shooting star is, and this was not it." There had been meteor showers going on earlier in the month, but not at this particular time. Cecil, noticing that Billy Ray was as white as a ghost and sweating profusely, asked him to come with him back outside and explain to him exactly what he had seen. With both men now standing outside, after Billy Ray motions to where the object had been and described it to Cecil, or better known as Lucky, Lucky then tells Billy Ray that they should go look in the back field, that whatever it was probably gone, and that after they look and see, that they should go back inside and enjoy what was left of the evening. But to both men's shock and amazement, as they stepped behind the house, headed towards the field, before their very eyes, emerging from that field, was a small being. But this being is unlike anything they've ever seen before. And these were men who were very familiar with wildlife, especially around Kentucky. It was about 3.5 feet tall. It had a big round head, large glowing eyes, big pointed ears, and long gangly arms that almost touched the ground. The being itself isn't walking with its legs, but rather it's floating above the grass headed towards them. Awestruck for a few seconds as the creature approaches them, the two then quickly run back to the house and rush inside, slamming the door behind them. Seeing the men rush inside startles the rest of the family, with most of them asking just what was wrong with them two. But as the men try to explain the seriousness of the situation, most of them think it was just some kind of joke. Considering these were people in their late teens and early 20s, most of the adults anyways, it wouldn't have been totally out of the realm of possibility for someone to pull a prank. However, they would quickly see that this was indeed not the case. Glennie, deciding that she had heard enough, told everyone that the children needed to get to bed. A short while later, after laying them down to sleep, she sees Cecil standing at the front door next to Billy Ray. One has a shotgun, and one has a rifle. Realizing that this wasn't some kind of prank, Glennie would ask Billy Ray, "Just what exactly did you see?" He would then tell her that, "Miss Glennie, I hope it's something that you never have to see." So she squats down there beside the two. It's a quiet night. There's a full moon, and its light is illuminating everything surrounding this small farmhouse. With this light, you can see nearly everything, and there's an obvious tension. Everyone there is certainly on edge, especially Billy Ray, who seems to be jumping at every sound made in the shadows. While Glennie sits there hearing the banter between everyone, she suddenly sees something that shakes her to her core. There before her very eyes, she sees this small entity rounding the corner of the house. Its eyes are massive and glowing. As a matter of fact, its whole body seems bioluminescent. And as most of us would do, she lets out a blood-curdling scream, shattering the quiet tension that had previously existed within the stillness of this strange night. Everybody quickly comes running to where she's at. She had been so startled that the shock had caused her to fall to the floor. Cecil, or Lucky, quickly helps her up, and she frantically tells him that, "I just saw it. There is something out here." As Glennie tries to explain what she saw in detail, her explanation is soon cut short by the rapturous sound of a gun being fired. Running to the source, they find Jesse, and he shot one through the window of the house. Billy Ray goes rushing out the front door, looking for anything out of the ordinary that could be a threat. As he's standing there below the little stoop over the front door, everyone else watching him soon sees a little clawed hand descend from the top of the stoop. This clawed hand then seems to try and grab his hair. As the others scream, before the hand can grab him, Lucky runs and grabs Billy Ray and pulls him into the house. He then rushes outside with his gun. There on top of the stoop, is one of these large-eyed beings. Without hesitation, being a country boy and all, Lucky raises his gun and shoots this creature. Bizarrely, however, when it's shot, he hears the impact and sees the creature roll. But instead of falling off the stoop, it slowly floats down to the ground instead. Following the shooting of this first creature, someone else screams that there's another one in the tree beside him. Turning around, Lucky then sees another one of these odd entities on one of the large tree's branches. He then quickly acts again, and he shoots. He hits it, and he hears the impact. When he hits it, as with the first one, it makes a pinging sound, like the bullet has hit something metallic. The creature then floats to the ground, rolls, and scurries off into the nearby brush. They don't know what these things are. They're certainly not dying. They're getting up and rolling away. So what are they to do? What else can they do? All of the commotion, of course, woke the children up out of their sleep, and all the kids as well have now seen these creatures alongside the adults, except for the youngest, June. She's absolutely petrified. She refuses to look. She's crying. She's screaming and is hiding in the corner of the living room. With all the children crying, these things, these creatures, start coming up to the windows and doors. The family, although fear-struck, do notice that if they keep the lights on, the creatures seem to stay in the darker shadows outside. That momentarily seems to keep them away from the house, but they seem to still keep coming up. Not knowing exactly what to do from here, Lenny suggests to Lucky that, well, if we quit shooting, maybe they'll stop coming up to the windows and doors. And Lucky replies with, "Mom, I don't know. I don't know what these things are, and I'm not about to let them in the house to find out." To add to the weirdness of the situation, when these beings would come up to the house, they had their little hands up in the air, almost as if they were surrendering, like they knew what that meant. Lenny even told Lucky that maybe something's wrong. They've got their hands up in the air. But Lucky would say that, "I don't care, Mom. We're not letting them in. We don't know what these are." And honestly, who can blame him? As this episode continued, Lucky tried to keep everyone calm. He told them, "We're going to Hopkinsville. We're going to try and get help, and this is going to be okay." As he got them all quiet, and just as he thought it was the right time to run out the door, he would freeze in his tracks. They all then would hear something peculiar, what they believed to be one of the creatures going across the tin roof. As it went across, its nails were clicking and scratching, making everyone's skin crawl and their hair stand on end. June started screaming again, and then all of the kids began crying. Vera asked Lucky, "What are we going to do?" And he would tell her, "Listen, we're going to get out of here. We're going to get help. Just calm down." It takes some time, but he once again manages to calm everyone down yet again. He then tells Billy Ray, "Let's go out the back and take a quick look." So the two step out into the yard, which is still glowing with the radiant light of the full moon. The two men are looking around, guns in hand. Billy Ray then turns around and grabs Lucky's arm and says, "Look, There's one going up the side of the house. There before the men was indeed one of the oddities climbing up the house, headed toward the roof. Lucky then aimed his shotgun and pulled the trigger. He was successful in hitting one of these things again. It fell to the ground, then popped up and floated from the back of the house over to a fence post about 40 feet away. Lucky then fires and hits this one a second time. Seeing this really gave the men pause. This thing floated in front of them across the yard like it defied the laws of physics. Lucky then tells Billy Ray, "Let's get back in the house and let's try to get out of here. Just don't tell everyone what you saw." And he more than likely was saying this as to not further upset the family. However, when they go back inside, of course everyone inside had heard the gunshots. Glennie, demanding to know, asks, "What did you just shoot at?" With Lucky replying, "It's okay." And Billy Ray chiming in as well, "We just had to shoot one of them off the house. But it's okay. We're okay." After the family is settled again, the night seems to get quiet. Nothing comes up to the windows or the doors. It's almost an eerie stillness. Lucky had thought maybe when he shot that one, that it had finally been injured. When it finally got to the fence post, when he had shot it again, it fell off. This time, it didn't scurry off as quickly as before, so he was thinking maybe he had finally got one. Feeling like things had calmed down enough, everyone all together would rush to their trucks, load up in them, and start the trip straight to Hopkinsville, looking nervously behind them the whole way. They would make it there to the small police station in the middle of the night. Again, the year is 1955. There's just one officer on duty, and suddenly, 11 people, ages 7 to 50, burst in, utterly terrified. The officer is just awestruck. They're all trying to explain what happened. The officer tries to make sense of it all and says, "Wait a minute, you're telling me that you're shooting little men at your farm?" To which Lucky responds with, "You don't understand what I'm trying to tell you." The officer, telling them all to calm down, says that he's going to call the chief. He dials on the phone and soon is on the line with Chief Russell Greenwell. He tells him, "Call Fort Campbell Army Base, which was about 10 miles from Hopkinsville. Call the newspaper and see if you can get every state trooper that's out tonight. Find them and get them to Kelly. We're going to see what's really going on." The chief's wife overhears all of this too, so she gets up and goes with him. They then head to the station as well. When they arrive, they see 11 terrified people. It's obvious that something has happened. The chief and his wife try to calm them. Within due time, all the additional authorities would arrive. By the time they do, there's approximately 25 people, including the police, military, and reporters. There's soon a caravan of vehicles now headed to the small town of Kelly in the dead of this strange night. When they all arrive at the farm, they step out of their vehicles and immediately feel that something is off. The place, the overall environment, just feels creepy. As they search, some of the police officers see a glowing substance on the ground around the back of the house. It was believed to be the spot where Lucky had shot one of the creatures. They run back there to look, but when they get close, the glow disappears. They call Chief Greenwell over, and he too looks at the spot. He says, well, I don't see any glow, but there's evidence that the grass is different in that spot than it is around it. They continue searching for about 2 to 3 hours, but nothing could be found. Glennie was beside herself. She was afraid to go back in the house. The chief would go up to her and say, Miss Glennie, I'm so sorry, but there's nothing here. Nothing except for evidence that y'all did some shooting. And indeed, rifle and shotgun shells were all over the outside of the house, and even in the inside of the house. The woodwork was shot up. Screens were shot through. There was nothing there to show what they had shot at. So with nothing left to do, the authorities would go ahead and leave. Glennie was left there with the rest of the family, with nobody else to help if these things came back, and she was truly hoping that they wouldn't return. Once the family is back inside, it does take some time yet again, but the kids eventually settle down and finally head back to bed. Lucky sits in a rocking chair beside Glennie, with a shotgun across his lap. They're all exhausted, both physically and mentally. Glennie closes her eyes, trying to get some rest. But then, something, and she's not sure what, causes her to open them yet again. There before her, to her horror, one of these creatures is yet again at the window. Thinking that she's just tired and possibly hallucinating, she then closes her eyes again. But when she opens them for a second time, and this being is still standing there, it's at this time that she screams to Lucky that they're back. Everyone then jumps up. Once again, they're trying to keep these creatures out of the house. And these efforts would continue until around 4:30 or 5 a.m. in the morning. But as the family struggled, with the morning sun starting to come up, the creatures seemingly out of nowhere disappeared. In the words of Geraldine Sutton Stith,
so sure enough, when that bright sunshine came up, they disappeared. Well, my dad got the family down, and he told them all. He says, listen, he says, I heard them last night. They were laughing at us. No good can come of this, so don't even say another word about it. We're just going to have to go on with our lives, forget this ever happened. And Vera asked him, says, well, how are we supposed to forget this? He says, I know it's going to be hard. I don't know, but we got to forget this happened.
What followed the events of August 21st of 1955 would effectively be a circus of unwanted publicity and tourism. A massive amount of people would descend upon the Sutton farm and make this case infamous, for better or for worse.
And so, word got out. I mean, it had gotten out. It didn't take long at all. Everybody from everywhere was coming from everywhere, wanting to see the little beings and camping out in the yard and wanting to talk to the family. And they got no rest. Of course, my dad and Billy Ray and the girls had to go back to work. They were able to stay another day or two, but then they had to leave, and my grandmother was going to be left there, her 3 kids, my Uncle JC and Aunt Eileen. Would they be able to take care of, these things if they were to come back? Because that was the big fear. Would they come back? Why were they there in the first place? And if they didn't get what they wanted the first time, would they come back to get it? That was a fear in Kelly. People that lived around there had this fear. My mom lived in Kelly with her first husband and 7 kids at the time. And she says it was terrifying. Everyone was scared. Well, my grandmother thought the best of it, and she sold the farm within 2 weeks and moved into Hopkinsville to an apartment complex. So did my Uncle JC and Aunt Eileen. Got out of there because she was afraid. She didn't know what else to do. She didn't want to leave her farm, but, she was terrified.
Geraldine herself goes in depth not only of the encounter itself, but lots of additional details surrounding it, as well as the circus that followed, in my interview with her on the Ghost in Me podcast, which I'll link here as well as in the description below. I would further explain the details, but she just adds so much herself that it would be an injustice not to let you hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. What is ultimately important to remember is that this was a family. They didn't ask for this to happen. They didn't seek financial compensation or try to make a spectacle in order to profit in any way. They simply were overwhelmed by what they were experiencing together and sought help through appropriate means. The publicity, or potential publicity, would have been an afterthought. Again, Geraldine very much goes in depth on this, as well as how the night affected her father as well as other members of her family in our interview. And between the interview, as well as diving into some of Geraldine's books surrounding the case and doing my own research online, I did find another case that is eerily similar in some respects, albeit not in Appalachia. I wanted to share it with you before giving my thoughts on the case as a whole. In July of 1692, amidst the turmoil of the Salem witch trials, the town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, experienced a series of mysterious events that left its residents both alarmed and perplexed. For approximately 2 weeks, the town was reportedly besieged by enigmatic figures believed to be the spectral apparitions of indigenous people and Frenchmen. Emerging from the swamps and cornfields, these entities approached the local garrison, often in groups. Attempts to defend against them proved futile. Firearms frequently misfired, and when they did discharge, bullets seemed to have no effect. The intruders spoke in an unfamiliar language, and while they carried functional weapons, or so it seemed, evident later by bullets found later embedded in trees, they caused no physical harm to the townspeople. The situation escalated to the point where Major Samuel Appleton of Ipswich dispatched approximately 60 men on July 18th to assist Gloucester during these inexplicable disturbances. Reverend John Emerson of Gloucester documented these occurrences in a letter to Cotton Mather, suggesting that the town's afflictions were the work of the devil and his agents, appearing as small creatures with large eyes and big ears, rather than tangible French and indigenous attackers. Mather, in his work Magnalia Christi Americana, noted that even a decade later, respected individuals in the region believed these events were a significant manifestation of the unseen world. This account, among others, indicates the pervasive atmosphere of fear and superstition that characterized the period, leading communities to interpret unexplained phenomena as supernatural threats. Other than the apparitions appearing as alleged people, others described the beings as small devils with large eyes and large ears, a glaring similarity to the Kelly Hopkinsville case that I've covered here today. Albeit not completely the same, I did find it noteworthy enough to mention. I also don't believe that the creatures experienced by Geraldine's family members wielded any sort of weapons, at least from what we know. While I am leaving many details to Geraldine herself, and for good reason, including myths and misconceptions about the case, all of which, again, we have covered on the Ghost in Me podcast episode with her, as well as in her books, which I'll tell you about here shortly, I did want to share my thoughts on the case as a whole, in no particular order. I remember hearing about the case from my good friend Bob, as well as watching the show Hellier, and coincidentally, when we were visiting the area together about 2 years ago, for reasons that were unrelated to the case itself, we did end up finding the coordinates of where the farm was located, and albeit it was at night, we did find ourselves at the exact location where the goblin encounter took place, which was surreal to say the least. I'm sure lots has changed since 1955, but there in the flesh, and to try to put yourself in the shoes of the family who endured the event, it really just adds another layer to this incredible story that I can't truly put into words. And even with much development taking place over the decades, the area of where the farm is located is still extremely rural, with one having to take several back roads to even find its location. Something that I noticed in Geraldine's recounting of the story was the metallic sound, or pinging, of the bullets as they hit the creatures, or as most refer to them now, as goblins. Was this perhaps due to some kind of force field or armor they had? That's where my mind tends to wander. And if this was the case, did they perhaps have that armor weakened as a result of multiple shots, as with Lucky shooting the other goblin for a second time near the post? They did also mention that these things were bioluminescent, that they seemed to have a sort of glow about them. But if perhaps they weren't truly glowing, could they maybe have had metallic skin or armor on perhaps? This metallic coating, or what have you, could have been reflecting the glow of the full moonlight that night. It would explain the pinging sounds. However, I tend to lean into it could have been a bit of both, because during the research with the authorities, several cops saw a glowing residue near where the goblin had been shot, near the post for the second time. That leads me to believe that maybe they could have had glowing blood, although that's just mere speculation on my part. I mean, if they were bioluminescent, it would only make sense, right? And with the concept of a force field fresh in our minds, did these goblins have some sort of telekinetic abilities? I mean, they were floating instead of falling, as if they defied the laws of physics themselves. Was this perhaps due to acute mental abilities? Or was it the result of foreign technology that we're just not aware of yet? When the creatures initially hid after their arrival, and then hid after the first interaction, and then after, I asked Geraldine if there were or are any caves where the farm is, and albeit she didn't know, there have been rumors of people finding goblin-like beings in the caves throughout Appalachia, which is a terrifying prospect indeed, to think that these things could ultimately perhaps be interconnected. With that being said, are these goblins, these entities, a manifestation of what we call the phenomenon, for lack of a better term, the mysterious supernatural force that seems to present itself just beyond the veil of our conscious minds, only seeping through for a brief time, and that very said veil is thinner than normal? Are they interdimensional creatures coming from another plane of existence? Or are they, as many believe them to be, given the unidentified flying object that Billy Ray saw, extraterrestrial in nature? Are they from another planet? All interesting thoughts to ponder, no doubt, as we've let our minds run wild and be immersed in this perplexing case. I wonder why the goblins approached the family as if they were surrendering, but then ultimately would end up scaling the house and then trying to grab Billy Ray from the stoop above the porch. Did they need help? Were they trying to convey this via their hands up signaling, or were they trying to lure the family into a false sense of security? Also, I do have to say, the thought of the little clawed hand and then the clanking of one on top of the roof, both of those instances are so creepy to me. Now, the authorities did do a thorough search that very morning, using both men on the ground as well as, I believe, helicopters, doing grid searches. But they didn't find any creatures themselves, albeit allegedly they found evidence of their existence, which ties into a whole other alien conspiracy rabbit hole. Geraldine goes extensively into this in several of her books, but most recently in the Kelly Green Men Alien Legacy Revisited, where she adds numerous details as well as photos of the alleged footprints found of the creatures. I can't stress that there's only so much I can add without mentioning both my interview with Geraldine as well as her books. She truly is the foremost authority on the case itself, and I find it very admirable just how much effort she puts into keeping what has become local Kentucky folklore now very much alive, for not only the folklore aspect, but her family's history. In conclusion, remember that this was a family. They didn't ask for what happened to them. Now, I wanted to quickly mention that Geraldine has a new book with a lot more information and historical references coming out very soon, and it should be available on Amazon, as well as most, if not all, main book-selling platforms. She also will be selling it via her Etsy shop, which is Aliens and Goblins, and that'll be for autographed copies. Now, following our interview, I actually ordered my own goblin from her store, and I just so happened to get it today, which is also when I happened to finish this script and recorded it for you folks now. Mine's name is Lucky, which is very cool, because that was Geraldine's dad's nickname, as you guys know from the story itself, and she included a copy of her book for me as well. So I know I've already reached out to you personally, but if you're watching this, thank you very much, Geraldine, for your time and your effort, and for this little guy as well as the book and photograph. I really and truly appreciate it. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but definitely go check out Geraldine's store and her books as well, and our interview together on the Ghost in Me podcast, which I now do weekly episodes on, delving into all sorts of high strangeness. I did also want to thank Phobicon for some of the artwork used in this video. Definitely support him and go show his videos some love, and subscribe while you're at it. You can also purchase my books, which Volume 3 of Stories from the Archives is coming very soon. It'll be available either on Amazon, Beyond the Fray Publishing, or you can order an autographed copy or copies from me at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. I've also added some new merchandise and will continue to do so as the content and the memes evolve as they do. Please also follow me on all my other platforms and join our Discord here, and I'll also link it below in the description. And last but not least, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, share it around, and leave me a comment letting me know about what you thought, both here and on the podcast video too. Thank you guys for all of your support and patience. I hope this video, although a little different, was still something that you enjoyed, and I'll see you again very soon with some more brand new content. As always, this has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Make sure to stay safe out there from goblins and other spooky things, and take care.
And he happened to be coming out of his bedroom. He came upstairs and he heard footsteps and nobody was here. So he went back downstairs. And when he went down, he happened to look and he seen this black, he described it as something that wasn't, or how did he say it? I said, I don't even know where you came up with that word, organically natural. And he said it flashed and then it went away.
While trying to recover from multiple surgeries over nearly a decade, a woman and her family are tormented by dark entities that invade their home, seemingly out of nowhere. After asking multiple paranormal investigators and a priest to help her clear her dwelling of these unexplained and terrifying entities, will she and her family be freed, or will they continue to be prisoners in their own home? This is the untold story of the Raric family haunting in Pennsylvania, and it truly is a terrifying haunting indeed. So grab a drink or a snack or both and prepare to get scared. And I wouldn't recommend watching or listening to this in the dark unless you like a challenge. The house at the edge of the forest had stood for decades, its weathered facade blending seamlessly with the quiet town of Montandon. From the outside, it seemed no different from any other home. A modest structure with a well-kept yard and windows that reflected the golden hues of dusk. But those who passed by in the dead of night often swore that they felt something watching them. The air around the property seemed heavier, colder, as if the house itself held secrets it refused to share. For the Raric family, it was a dream come true, a step up from the cramped mobile home where they had spent years scraping by. Todd and Jacinda Raric had worked tirelessly to make it theirs, pouring love and labor into every corner. But no amount of paint or polish could erase the sense of unease that seemed to linger just beneath the surface. It was subtle at first, the way the shadows in the hallway stretched longer than they should, or how certain rooms always felt a few degrees colder no matter the season. By the time they realized that their sanctuary had become a prison, it was too late. This is not a story of flickering lights or misplaced keys. It is a story of something older, darker, and far more insidious. A force that thrived on fear and despair, feeding on the cracks of the Raric's lives until it threatened to consume them entirely. The events that unfolded within those walls would forever mark them, leaving scars that no amount of time could fully heal. And to think it all began with one small light. The small town of Montandon, in the heart of Pennsylvania, a place where life ambled quietly through the sunlit afternoons and starry nights. The Raric family, Jacinda and her husband Todd, and their 20-year-old son Justin, had called it home for nearly 14 years. Their modest 3-bedroom house was tucked at the edge of a forest, a place where shadows seemed to linger just a little bit too long. Montandon was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, a tight-knit community bound by shared traditions and familiarity. The grocery clerk knew which brand of coffee you liked before you asked, and neighbors always waved from their porches. It was a place that felt safe, ordinary even, which made the events that unfolded within the Raric household all the more chilling. Jacinda was in recovery from major back surgery, the aftermath of years of hard work and determination catching up to her body. The procedure had been grueling, meant to repair herniated discs, but it left her with more pain than relief. Her days were now filled with restless idleness, an unfamiliar state for someone so used to motion. She spent much of her time in the living room, gazing out at the trees that bordered their yard, their leaves whispering with secrets in the breeze. Her husband Todd, a repairman at a local brewery, had taken on the dual role of caregiver and provider, his demeanor oscillating between steadfast support and quiet exhaustion. Todd was a practical man, his faith rooted in what he could see and fix with his hands. He tried to assure Jacinda with humor and routine, though he could see the toll her recovery was taking on her spirit. Justin, fresh from high school and nursing a shoulder injury from a summer mishap, found himself housebound as well. The injury had sidelined his plans to work full-time at the local hardware store, leaving him with hours to fill and a growing sense of frustration. He spent his days flipping through old magazines, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, and helping his mother as much as his limited mobility allowed. The first sign came in the form of light. Jacinda, leafing through photographs of Justin's graduation, noticed something peculiar. Small, luminous orbs scattered the images. Some glowed a soft white, others a spectral purple. They hovered in the corners, barely visible, yet unmistakably present. At first she thought it was a trick of light, but as she flipped through more photos, the pattern persisted. Jacinda's heart leapt at the thought that these could be her parents, long gone, but never forgotten. Their presence, if real, was a comfort, a balm against the isolating monotony of her recovery. "Look at this, Todd," she said one morning, holding a photograph up to the light. "These orbs, they're in every picture. Don't you think it's strange?" Todd glanced over, his expression a mix of amusement and exasperation. "Camera flares," he said, brushing it off. "You're overthinking it." He kissed her on the forehead and then left for work, leaving Jacinda alone with her thoughts. But Jacinda couldn't let it go. She began documenting the orbs obsessively, taking picture after picture, each new snapshot only deepening her conviction. The orbs appeared in the kitchen, the hallway, even her bedroom. Some seemed to shimmer with a faint inner light, their edges blurring like tiny stars caught on film. As the days turned into weeks, the orbs became more active. Jacinda began noticing subtle movements within the shimmering lights. They seemed to drift closer when she was alone, as if trying to communicate something just beyond the edge of her perception. Occasionally, she would hear faint whispers accompanying their presence, indecipherable but undeniably there. The whispers became louder over time, escalating into fragmented phrases that would flit away just as she tried to focus on them. But the house held more than just playful flickers of light. There was a weight in the air, a suffocating heaviness that seemed to press down on her chest. She felt it most acutely within the quiet hours of the night, when the world outside fell silent and the shadows within seemed to grow restless. The sound of creaking floorboards, faint knocking at odd hours, and sudden cold drafts became a nightly occurrence. The temperature would drop dramatically in certain rooms, and the family's pets, a loyal dog and 2 skittish cats, would refuse to enter those spaces. One evening, while Justin lay in the living room, he heard it, the distinct sound of footsteps above him, heavy and deliberate. They moved across the ceiling, each step a dagger of dread stabbing into his mind. His parents weren't home, and the house should have been silent. "Mom, Dad," he called out, his voice trembling. There was no response. When he mustered the courage to investigate, he found nothing. The doors were locked, the lights off. Yet the sense of unease lingered, settling deep into his bones. I heard footsteps, he told his mother the next morning. Someone was in the house. Jacinda's eyes widened. "It's the shadow," she whispered. "I've seen it too." Justin's skepticism melted into fear. He dismissed his mother's tales of orbs and presences, chalking them up to the side effects of medication or the imagination of a mind left idle for too long. But now the reality of her words clawed at him. The sightings grew bolder. A pool table in the basement, untouched for weeks, suddenly erupted into sound. The sharp crack of billiard balls breaking echoed throughout the house. When Justin went to investigate, he saw the balls scattered as if a game had been interrupted mid-play. Then there was the shadow, a dark, formless silhouette that loomed in the corner of his vision, its presence oppressive and consuming. Though it had no discernible features, he felt it staring into him, peeling back the layers of his mind to expose his deepest fears. The entity then began to rush at him, but before another scream could erupt from his mouth, almost as if in the blink of an eye, it vanished.
The room, his bedroom was off to the side. We had a pool table down there in the bar, so we hung out there all the time. That's where we lived. And he happened to be coming out of his bedroom. He came upstairs and he heard footsteps and nobody was here. So he went back downstairs and he heard the footsteps again, so he came back up, and then he heard the pool table balls break downstairs. And when he went down, he happened to look and he seen this black, he described it as something that wasn't, or how did he say it? I said, I don't even know where you came up with that word, organically natural. And he said it flashed and then it went away. And then he finally came to me. At that time, he had graduated from high school and he was working at a local hardware store. And he had came to me, he's like, "Mom, I finally believe you." And I was just so happy that somebody was finally, on the same page with me.
Jacinda's paintings, once her escape, began to betray her. One night, as she gazed at a completed piece, she saw the colors shifting, melting as if consumed by an unseen force. The patterns twisted unnaturally, forming faces and eyes that seemed to watch her with malevolence. A sharp pain lanced through her head, and she collapsed, gasping for air. Along with these more intense manifestations of something evil, the family, along with terrible sleep within the home due to almost constant feelings of anxiety, began to experience something else as well: lapses in time. In one instance, Jacinda had been laying in bed one moment, and almost as if waking up from a dream, she found herself at the top of the stairs, ready to step and descend into the basement. A move that, if it had gone wrong, would have led to even more catastrophic pain and injury, given her state of health. One night, Jacinda finally broke. "It's the house," she sobbed to Todd. "It's trying to kill us." Todd's patience wore thin. "You're stressed," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "You're recovering from surgery, and you're letting your mind run wild." But even he couldn't ignore the signs forever. One night, during a rare family dinner, Todd clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain. His skin turned ashen, his breaths shallow and labored. They rushed him to the emergency room, but the tests would reveal nothing. Yet Todd's near collapse left an indelible mark on the family, a lingering sense that the house was exacting its toll on each of them. Desperate for answers, Jacinda reached out to the Central Pennsylvania Paranormal Research Association, a team led by two psychics named Christine and Liz. After speaking with them, they would soon arrive at the house. Upon stepping inside, Christine's face would darken. "There's a presence here," she said. "It's ancient, and it's angry." Prior to arriving at the home, the team's investigation had unearthed a chilling history. It was their belief, alongside their research, that centuries ago, a group of Eastern European travelers had camped on the property, performing rituals that had opened a gateway to something dark. The presence that now haunted the Raric family was no benign spirit, but a demonic force, one that was drawn to the house by the vulnerabilities of its inhabitants. "It's attached itself to you," Christine told Jacinda. "Your illness made you an easy target, and now it's feeding on your family's fear and pain." In an attempt to free the family, the team would conduct a cleansing of the home. As they got underway, their prayers began to fill the house with light and sound. But as this happened, the air seemed to shiver as the entity began to fight back, its rage palpable. Shadows thickened and writhed, taking on grotesque shapes that lunged at the investigators before dissolving into nothingness. The furniture creaked ominously, and objects flew from shelves with violent force. Towards the tail end of the cleansing ritual, a deafening silence fell over the room, like that of snow falling within a forest. The entity then let out one last burst of furious energy. This burst shook the house to its foundation, with windows and doors shuddering in its vibration. Following this display of power, however, a calm descended. The oppressive weight seemed to be lifted. The shadows receded, and for the first time in months, the house felt like a home again. In the aftermath, the Rarics began to heal, their bond stronger for having faced the darkness together. Todd, once skeptical, now spoke with quiet reverence of the ordeal. "There are things we don't understand," he admitted, "but that doesn't mean that they aren't real." Jacinda, though still scarred by the experience, found solace in the belief that her parents had been watching over her all along, their love a shield against the malevolent force that had invaded their lives. As she stood at the edge of the forest one evening, gazing up at the stars, she whispered a quiet thank you to the spirits that she hoped were still near. And in the silence that followed, she felt an embrace, a warm and reassuring one, like the arms of a mother and father who would always protect their child. Months later, life in the Raric household had found a semblance of normalcy. The memories of their harrowing experience lingered, but so did a renewed sense of gratitude and strength. Their story remained a cautionary tale in the community, whispered over cups of coffee and told in hushed tones by neighbors. For the Rarics, it was a reminder of the thin veil that separates the seen from the unseen. Though they thought it was the end of their ordeal, it was unfortunately not the case for them. The months following the cleansing seemed to just be a respite from the chaos, for it would resume with horrendous vigor. And it seemed to further pursue Jacinda, perhaps believing her to be the weakest link of the family due to her health. The family tried cleansings from priests, from paranormal groups, but nothing seemed to work. Jacinda, through reaching out for help, would hear from a psychic that it wasn't just one entity that haunted her and her family, that it was multiple, 4 to be exact, that these entities were indeed ancient, that they were demons. Demons who had been summoned through various rituals many moons ago, and that haunted the land itself, but had attached themselves to her due to her vulnerable state, feeding off of her fear, anxiety, and ultimately her life force. This was almost identical to the theory the Central Pennsylvania Paranormal Research Association team had as well. More strange and scary manifestations would take place over the years. All the trees and vegetation surrounding the home would die. Distortions in time would continue to take place. Their nightmares would bleed over into daymares as the shadows would contort and twist, morphing into non-organic monstrosities before their very eyes, before then dissipating into nothing. What makes this all the more disturbing is that through my research on this case, I believe the family still lives there and continues to deal with these dark and horrendous entities. The last interview I could find with Jacinda was with the Grave Talks podcast, which I'll link below, and that was posted in 2019. It's also where the beginning audio segment came from. It really is a fascinating interview, and I highly recommend that you go check it out. And I would also like to thank Tony from Real Ghost Stories Online and the Grave Talks podcast for allowing me to use that segment. The thought of being so vulnerable, like following a surgery, or in this case, surgeries, and having to deal with spiritual manifestations on top of physical pain and mental turmoil as a result of both, is just harrowing to try and fathom. I really have to say that Jacinda truly seems to be a strong-willed person, and I pray that wherever her and her family are now, whether it's still in the same home or not, that they've found peace, albeit that doesn't seem to be the case based off of my research. But wishing someone the best certainly never did any harm. There's a lot of small details in this case as well, but I tried my best to touch on major points. And as always, I recommend you dive into your own research if you'd like to know more. For years it stood in silence, its walls swollen with secrets, its halls thick with shadows. Mark and Claire Sullivan never planned to return, but after their mother's death, they had no choice. Ashwood House was their inheritance, a place of childhood memories, long buried under dust and something darker. Now, as they step across the threshold, the air is heavy with something unseen. The past lingers here, whispering in the walls, watching from the corners, and it has been waiting for them. I did want to let you guys know that Volume 3 of Stories from the Archives, my third book, is now out via Amazon, or you can purchase an autographed copy from me at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com. Each volume contains deep dives into 10 terrifying paranormal cases, including my own. Please don't forget to check out some more episodes at the end of this one. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. For years, decades, perhaps longer than anyone living could remember. It stood at the edge of the forest, shrouded in tangled ivy and the weight of forgotten years. Its walls swollen with secrets. Some places are simply abandoned, left to decay in silence, but others are forsaken, left behind, not by choice, but by necessity. Ashwood House was the latter. Mark Sullivan never thought he'd return here. Neither did his sister Claire. Yet, in the wake of their mother's passing, duty called them back to the place where they had spent their childhood summers. The place where something had changed their family forever. It had been a house full of love once, filled with the scent of old books and their grandmother's lavender perfume. But that warmth had long since faded, swallowed by whispers in the walls and shadows that stretched too long at night. Now, as their car rumbled up the overgrown drive, the house loomed ahead, its gaping windows like vacant eyes, watching them. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter. Claire, beside him, exhaled a breath that she hadn't realized she was holding. Neither of them spoke. Somewhere deep inside, the house felt them arrive, and somewhere even deeper, something else stirred. The car's headlights cut through the dusk as Mark Sullivan steered up a winding dirt lane, dense woods pressing in on either side. Beside him, his younger sister Claire sat quietly, hands twisting in her lap. The old Ashwood House finally loomed into view, a two-story silhouette against a moonless night sky. Mark killed the engine, and in the sudden silence, both siblings gazed at the darkened house. Its windows were black and empty, and the timber frame seemed to lean toward them as if in greeting. A once grand porch sagged under the weight of years of disuse. Claire shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "Welcome home," Mark murmured, attempting a wry tone, but his voice cracked slightly. Neither of them had visited this property since they were children. This was Grandma Rose's house, inherited by their mother, and now, after their mother's recent passing, left to the two of them. It might have been a lovely inheritance if it wasn't for the whispers of tragedy tied to it. The same tragedy that haunted their family for decades. Mark pushed open the car door, and the creak of its hinge was unnaturally loud. Gravel crunched under his boots. Claire hesitated, staring at the house's front window. In her memory, that door had always been painted a cheerful blue. Now, it was faded to a peeling gray, reminding her of a gaping mouth. They ascended the porch together. The wood planks groaned underfoot. Mark fumbled with the old key their mother had left, and the lock finally gave with a loud crack, making Claire jump. He shot her a reassuring smile he didn't feel. "It's just a house," he said softly. She nodded, but her eyes remained wide. Stepping inside, they were greeted by a stale chill. The air smelled of dust, mold, and something indefinably sweet, like flowers long since dried and dead. Claire found a light switch and flicked it. Nothing. The power was off. Mark swept the beam of his flashlight across the foyer, sheets draped over furniture like ghostly forms, wallpaper peeling into long strips, and an old grandfather clock stood guard in the corner, its pendulum still. As they ventured further, the quiet was thick and unbroken. They were truly alone in this house of echoes. Mark set down their bags in what used to be the parlor. The flashlight's narrow beam painted long shadows on the walls. "I'll go find the breaker box," he said, trying to sound upbeat. Claire nodded and knelt to unzip one of the bags, producing 2 thick candles and a lighter. Within minutes, a small flame cast a trembling glow, pushing back the darkness a few feet in each direction. The siblings exchanged a glance and gave each other small smiles of encouragement. While Mark went to restore the power, Claire remained in the parlor, the candles' glow her only company. She scanned the room, heart thumping. Here stood the old rocking chair where Grandma Rose used to sit and knit. It rocked gently, as if nudged by an unseen hand. She stepped closer, the floorboard sighing beneath her chair. The chair was still now. It was probably just a draft, she told herself. She wrapped her arms around herself and wandered toward a side table covered in a dusty sheet. On it sat a framed photograph. Lifting the sheet, Claire revealed the photo and felt a pang in her chest. It was her mother as a young girl. She was smiling brightly on this very porch, Rose's arm around her shoulders. They both looked so happy. Claire bit her lip, recalling how that happiness had drained from her mother in the later years, replaced by sorrow and ramblings about voices in the house. A sudden thud from upstairs shattered the silence. Claire gasped, nearly dropping the frame. Her candle flickered. "Mark," she called out, with her voice tight. No answer. Mark was in the basement, not upstairs. The thud sounded again, louder, as if something heavy had fallen onto the floor in an upper room. Claire's mind raced. An intruder, possibly, or something else. With her heart continuing to pound, she took a tentative step into the hall. That staircase rose before her, its upper landing swallowed in the darkness. She stared into that void, candlelight quivering, and for a moment she thought she had heard a faint whisper filtering down. A small murmur, just out of the edge of hearing. It almost sounded like her name was being said, and the hairs on her neck rose up at the thought. Before she could call for Mark again, he appeared at the end of the hall, flashlight in hand. "Power's out for good. The wires are shot," he said. And then he noticed her stance. "What's wrong?" Claire turned to him, her face pale. "I heard something upstairs," she whispered. Mark frowned, stepping forward protectively. Together, they climbed the stairs, the wood moaning under each footstep. At the top, Mark swept his flashlight around. The corridor was empty. Doors to bedrooms and storage rooms ajar. Dust motes danced in the beam, and there was no sign of anything out of place. Mark checked each room briskly, opening closets, peering under old furniture. But there was nothing. It was probably an animal on the roof, he reassured Claire, who nodded uncertainly. Yet as they stared back down, she caught one last sound, one that was so soft she thought she might have imagined it. A distant sobbing of a woman. She didn't tell Mark, though. Not yet. They set up camp for the night in the parlor, preferring to stay together on the ground floor. Mark managed to get the fireplace in the parlor lit with some dry wood that he had found, and soon a small fire crackled, easing the chill. The siblings sat on the dusty rug with blankets wrapped around them. The warm light painted flickering shapes on the walls. It should have been cozy, but unease clung to them. Mark was fiddling with a handheld radio he had brought, but it only hissed with static. There was no signal in these deep woods. He shut it off, and for a moment, the only sounds heard were the pop of embers and the tick of that old grandfather clock, which had inexplicably began ticking again. Claire broke the silence. "Do you remember much about coming here as kids?" she asked quietly. Mark stared into the fire. "Bits and pieces," he said. "Mostly happy times. Until that last visit." Claire nodded. That final visit over 15 years ago, when she was only a child of 7. The night that she had been sent home early with an uncle while Mark stayed with Mom. Something happened that night. Their mother had never spoken directly of it, but her behavior changed forever. She became anxious, depressive, muttering about seeing her father, who had died in Ashwood House years before, wandering the halls. It was as if part of her had never left this place. Claire remembered waking at her home to her mother's screams from nightmares about Ashwood. Mark's jaw tightened. "Mom always said that this house was special to our family, but after grandmother died here, she refused to return, and I never understood why." Claire hesitated, then admitted in a small voice, "I think Mom saw things here and heard things. She used to tell me at night that Grandma Rose was watching us. At the time, I thought she meant as an angel or something, but now I'm not so sure." Mark turned to her, surprise in his eyes. He hadn't known that. Before he could respond, a sharp clatter came from the kitchen, adjoining the parlor. It sounded like a metal pot falling, and both of them jumped up. "Stay here," Mark ordered, grabbing the flashlight. He stepped to the dark kitchen doorway. The firelight didn't reach that room, and its interior was pitch black. As he swung the beam across the kitchen, something skittered across the floor. A raccoon, it seemed, and it then disappeared through a broken lower cabinet panel. Mark exhaled, with his pulse calming. Probably it had knocked over a pan. "Just a critter," he reported, relief evident. Claire managed a shaky smile. They then settled again by the fire. Mark poked at the embers, adding another log. "We'll clean up, sort through things tomorrow, and be out of here by tomorrow evening," he said decisively. Claire agreed readily. Neither wanted to spend more time there than necessary. Later that night, Claire was dozing off under her blanket, while Mark kept first watch. He wasn't sure what he was watching for. The house was abandoned after all, yet he felt unwilling to fully sleep. His eyes grew heavy as the fire died down, and just as he was about to nod off, a creak sounded from the hallway, like a footstep on the wooden floor. Mark's eyes snapped open. The hall lay beyond the parlor door, and he could just make out the edge of the grandfather clock in the faint firelight. It strangely was no longer ticking. He rose silently, straining to listen. Another creak, unmistakable this time, and then a gentle series of knocks on the front door. Mark's heart lurched into his throat. Who would come here at this hour? He grabbed the flashlight and crept forward, Claire stirred awake, whispering, "What is it?" "Someone's at the door," Mark said, under his breath. Claire sat up, fear jolting through her drowsiness. Mark approached the door, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. The knock then came again, a polite tapping. He mustered courage and called, "Hello? Who's there?" But there was no answer, just silence thick enough to choke on. He glanced back at Claire, who had risen, clutching her blanket around her. He grasped the doorknob and slowly turned it, the latch clicking, opening the door just a few inches. He peered out with his flashlight. The beam illuminated an empty porch and the yard beyond. There was no one. The night was deathly still. Not even a breeze stirred. Mark's breath fogged in the cold air. He stepped onto the porch, shining the light all around, but there was nothing but overgrown weeds and the gravel driveway, the one that their car was quietly parked on. A chill crawled over his skin. He shut and rebolted the door. "No one's there," he said softly. Claire had come up behind him. "I heard it too, Mark, clear as day." They then exchanged uneasy looks. Something unseen was toying with them. By the next day's gray morning light, Mark and Claire were eager to finish their business. They spent hours sorting through what was salvageable. Photo albums, some antique knickknacks of Grandma Rose's, and important papers. Both tried to act as though the previous night had just been nerves and natural noises, but each knew that it was more. They moved mostly in silence, the tension between them taut. Claire could sense Mark's skepticism wavering. He looked strained, eyes darting to empty doorways, as if expecting to see someone standing there. In the afternoon, they ventured into the master bedroom, the very room where Grandma Rose had died in her sleep decades ago. Dust laid thick on the vanity and the framed mirror above it. As Claire wiped a circle clean on the mirror with a rag, she paused, seeing her reflection and Mark's behind her. For an instant, she thought she saw a third figure reflected over her shoulder, a gaunt old woman in a lace nightgown, standing between them with hollow eyes. Claire whirled around with a gasp, but no one else was there. But the mirror's surface, now cleared of dust, suddenly splintered with a web of cracks radiating from the center. Mark dropped the box he was carrying. The siblings stared at the mirror, their hearts thudding in their chests. The cracks in the glass vaguely formed a shape, almost like that of a spider or a human-esque figure. Claire's hand shook. "We need to go, Mark," she whispered, with her voice quivering. "This house, it's angry or something." Mark swallowed, picking up the box again to mask his own fear. "Soon as we finish Mom's paperwork," he muttered. They found what they needed in an old roll-top desk in the corner. The deed, some letters, and a leather-bound diary that belonged to Grandma Rose. Curious, Claire opened the diary, and the siblings skimmed through brittled yellow pages. Rose's neat cursive detailed her daily life, gardening, cooking, but the final entries grew erratic. One entry caught their eye. "I hear him at night. Thomas knocks on the door, but I know he's been dead for 10 years. He wants me to join him. Last night, I saw him at the foot of my bed, smiling. I'm not afraid to go." The entry was dated the night before Rose died. Thomas was their grandfather, who indeed had died years prior in the very same house. Claire read the words aloud, tears in her eyes. She was seeing grandfather's ghost, and she wasn't afraid. Mark exhaled with a shaky breath. Their mother had hinted at similar experiences, seeing her father's specter in the halls. It's like all the Sullivans get called back here by the dead, Mark said, with his voice hushed. A sudden bang then echoed from downstairs, as if a door had slammed itself shut. They both jumped. That was enough. They gathered the essential papers and decided to leave the rest. It was growing dark again. The day had slipped away faster than expected, and neither relished a second night, but fate had other plans. When Mark tried the front door, he found it stuck fast. He yanked at the knob, and it wouldn't budge. It was as if it was held by an unseen force. "No," he said, "not now." With his adrenaline spiking, he and Claire together pulled, and suddenly the door flew open with such force that Claire staggered back. A frigid wind blasted into the foyer, extinguishing their candle and lantern. The darkness that fell was absolute, and in it, they heard a soft giggle, a child's giggle echoing from somewhere above. Claire's trembling hand found Mark's. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, and he nodded, though she could barely see him through the dim light from the clouded dusk outside. They had opened the door, but outside was now pitch black and uninviting. An early night descending with storm clouds gathering. The giggle then sounded again, this time from the hallway behind them. Claire's eyes welled with tears. "We have to get out," she insisted. Mark agreed wholeheartedly. Grabbing their bag and the documents, they stepped onto the porch, only to have the door slam shut behind them with a boom that seemed to cause the entire house to shudder. Mark fumbled with the car keys as thunder rumbled in the distance. Claire was already halfway to the car when she realized that Mark wasn't following. He stood at the foot of the porch steps, staring at the car. All 4 tires were now completely flat, as if slashed. In the fading light, they could see deep gashes in the rubber. "How?" Claire stammered. Mark spun around, scanning the area, but there was no sign of another person, no footprints. The air then felt suddenly oppressive, heavy, with the promise of a storm and something more malevolent. A fat raindrop then splashed on Claire's cheek. They were stranded. "The keys to the old shed," Mark said, thinking aloud. There had been an old pickup truck in the shed years ago. Maybe, just maybe, it still worked. It was a slim hope. The shed was behind the house, past an overgrown garden. With flashlights in hand, they dashed through the yard as the sky split with lightning. The thunder that followed was so loud, it rattled in their chests. Rain lashed down as Mark and Claire pried open the shed's swollen doors. Inside, the smell of gasoline and dust filled their noses. Mark's flashlight found the shape of the old pickup truck under a tarp. He yanked the tarp aside, coughing at the billow of dust. The truck sat like a fossil of another age, rusted blue paint and flat tires. It wouldn't be going anywhere tonight. Claire's hope sank. "Mark, we might have to wait out the storm and walk by morning," she said, wiping rain from her eyes. Mark cursed under his breath, frustrated and scared. He knew staying meant facing whatever was inside the house, but stumbling blindly through a stormy forest could be just as dangerous. A sudden noise made both of them freeze. Through the roar of the rain, they heard music. A faint, tinkling melody was coming from inside the house, audible even outside. What made things stranger is that Claire recognized it. It was a lullaby tune from an old music box their mother used to have, one that also had belonged to their grandma Rose. They had left it on the mantle in the parlor earlier, and now it was playing by itself, each note carried through the night, eerily slow. Claire felt tears mix with the rain on her face. "It's Mom's lullaby," she whispered. Mark set his jaw. "No, it's not Mom, Claire. Don't listen to it." But Claire was already stepping back toward the house, entranced by the memories. On countless nights as children, that lullaby had soothed them to sleep. Hearing it now tugged at her heartstrings. Could it be their mother's spirit? Was she there trying to comfort them? Or was something else luring them? Without realizing, they had both moved back toward the house. The front door stood open, despite having slammed when they initially exited the house. A warm light glowed from within. The fireplace was roaring, casting flickers onto the porch. Mark's mind then began to race. They had put the fire out before packing up, hadn't they? Yes, they definitely did. So who rekindled it? They wondered. The siblings exchanged a look of fear and resolve. They had to confront whatever it was. There was no escaping it now. Hand in hand, they crossed the threshold once more. The front door drifted shut behind them, as if guided by invisible hands, but softly this time. Inside, the music box lullaby chimed from the parlor. The fire danced high, far too vigorous for an unattended flame. In front of the hearth stood a figure. Claire's breath caught as she saw the silhouette of a woman in a modest dress, gray hair in a loose bun. "Grandma?" she whispered incredulously. The figure then turned. Even with her spectral, translucent form, the resemblance was clear. It was Grandma Rose, just as she had looked in the old photos. Eyes milky and distant, Rose's lips curved into a gentle smile. Mark felt a lump in his throat. Could it truly be her? "Gran," he began, taking a step forward, and then bang, a door somewhere upstairs slammed violently, cutting him off. Rose's apparition suddenly flickered, her kindly smile twisting into an expression of terror. She lifted an arm and pointed towards the stairs. Claire and Mark both turned to look, and at the top of the staircase stood another figure, shrouded in darkness. Lightning flashed through a window, illuminating the form. A tall man in an old-fashioned suit, half his face cast in the shadow. Their grandfather Thomas, or what remained of him. His eyes were fixed on Rose, with a look of longing and rage combined. Claire realized they were witnessing an echo of the past, the final night of Rose's life, perhaps. Rose's ghostly form backed away toward the hearth. "I won't go with you," she whispered, voice thin and warbling with age and fear. The man at the stairs, Thomas's ghost, descended step by step. Each footfall, a dull thud. The house reacted with creaks and a sudden gust that whisked papers off the tables. Mark grabbed Claire's arm. "We need to stop this," he yelled over the rising wind that seemed to swirl inside the house. The siblings placed themselves between the ghosts. Claire, with tears streaming, shouted to the man, "Leave her alone. She's not yours to take." Thomas's ghost paused, as if noticing the living for the first time. His eyes, black pits, bore into Claire. She felt a stab of ice in her chest and staggered. Mark moved in front of her protectively. The music box melody warped and slowed, and then stopped. "She is mine," Thomas's voice rumbled, sounding like dry leaves. With a burst of speed, his spirit lunged. Rose's ghost wailed, and suddenly the room exploded in chaos. The fire blew out, plunging everything into strobing darkness, lit only by the flashes of lightning. Picture frames flew from the walls, shattering around them. An unseen force shoved Mark hard, and he crashed against the wall, knocking the breath out of him. Claire screamed as an antique vase lifted and hurled toward her. She ducked, and it smashed on the wall behind. Amidst the frenzy, Thomas's apparition advanced on Rose's, driving her into a corner, his form growing larger and more menacing with each step. Summoning courage, Claire scrambled up and did the only thing that she could think of. She grabbed the music box from the mantel. It was still open, the key turning on its own. "Grandpa Thomas," she screamed out. The dark figure halted and twisted his head toward her unnaturally. Claire's voice shook, but she pressed on. "You don't belong here anymore, and Grandma doesn't want to go with you." In response, Thomas's ghost let out a growl that resonated through the floorboards. Mark regained his feet and rushed to Claire's side. Together they faced the entity. Claire, in a burst of defiance, began to wind down the toy box, forcing it to stop. The lullaby's notes slowed to a crawl. The raging activity in the house seemed to falter uncertainly. Rose's ghost, quivering, took the chance to slip away from the corner and move near the siblings, as if seeking shelter behind them. "You can't have her," Mark shouted, "and you can't have us either." He grabbed an iron poker from beside the fireplace, brandishing it. The iron glinted. Traditionally, iron was said to ward off spirits. Thomas's ghost recoiled at the sight of the poker, his form flickering. The thunder outside built into a crescendo as the storm peaked. The dark specter's face contorted with fury, and a rasping voice that no longer resembled their grandfather's. It hissed, "All of you are mine. Blood of my blood. You belong to this house." With that, Thomas's spirit surged forward in a final, furious attempt, the wind of his passing dousing even the embers in the hearth. Mark instinctively thrust the poker out. There was a sound like a scream mixed with a howl, and the metal passed through the apparition, which shrieked and burst apart into a cloud of black, swirling smoke. The force of it knocked both siblings backward on the floor. The cloud of darkness swirled violently around the ceiling, and then streamed up the staircase and vanished into the attic with a final, ear-splitting shriek. Silence fell, broken only by the distant patter of rain on the roof. The furniture settled. The house stood calm and still, as if nothing had happened. Claire and Mark sat up, trembling and clinging to each other. The only light now came from the occasional flicker of lightning. Rose's ghost stood before them, her form now gentle and sad. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice clearer now. Her eyes met Claire's and Mark's in turn. They felt a warmth, a grandmother's love, emanate from her. Rose drifted closer, reaching out a translucent hand. Claire felt a soft touch brush her hair. It felt like a cool breeze stroking her, yet comforting her as well. Mark heard a faint echo of his name in Rose's voice. Rose's ghost pointed once more, this time toward the diary on the floor, as if urging them to remember what they had learned. Then she gazed upward toward the attic, where the darkness had fled. Her task was unfinished. Thomas's tormented spirit was still up there. But dawn was approaching. Through a window, the siblings could see the storm was passing, and the black of the night was giving way to early gray. Rose's figure started to fade with the coming light. Claire found herself crying out, "Grandma, wait! What should we do?" Rose turned to them one last time. Her face was peaceful. "Live," she whispered, the word echoing in the air. And then she was gone, her form dissolving into the first ray of morning sun that peeked through the broken clouds. Morning light flooded the ruined parlor. The aftermath was evident. Shattered glass, toppled furniture, water dripping from a broken window pane, soot smeared across the walls. Mark and Claire sat amid the debris, exhausted and bewildered, but alive. The oppressive heaviness that had plagued Ashwood House seemed lifted. The air felt lighter, cleansed by the rain and perhaps by the departure of Rose's ghost. Thomas's presence was no longer palpable, though an uneasy feeling lingered, knowing some part of him remained trapped in the attic. With unspoken agreement, the siblings began to clean up as best as they could. It felt almost like tending to a grave, a sign of respect for the house and their ancestors. They worked quietly, side by side. Claire's hands still shook when she picked up the remnants of the music box, its hinge broken from when she wrenched it. She found the tiny photograph that had been inside the lid, a picture of Grandma Rose and Grandfather Thomas in happier times, long before death and despair overtook them. Mark gently took it from her and set it aside carefully. By the afternoon, the sky was clear and pale. Mark had repaired one of the car's tires with the spare and patch kit. The others he managed to inflate just enough with a portable pump. It would be a slow, careful drive back to town, but it was possible. They packed what few items they were taking, notably the diary and papers. As they stood on the porch ready to depart, Claire turned to look back into the house. Sunbeams slanted through the open door, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. In the daylight, the house looked merely old and sad, not frightening. Her eyes landed on the staircase and followed it up to the shadows of the attic door. A chill ran through her as she remembered the inky cloud of Thomas's spirit fleeing there. Would he still be lurking and waiting there for them? "We could burn it down," Mark said abruptly, reading her thoughts. His voice was flat, but Claire heard the conflict in it. This house held so much pain. Perhaps destroying it would end Thomas's curse. She considered the idea. Strike a match and let the old wood and all of its ghosts turn into ash. She even imagined Rose's spirit might approve, freeing Thomas and herself from this limbo. Claire stepped off the porch and looked at the weathered facade one last time. "No," she said quietly. "This was home to those we loved. It's part of us." She reached and took Mark's hand. "We'll let it stand. we'll let it rest. Maybe in time what haunts it will fade. Mark searched her eyes and then nodded. They locked the front door and walked to the car. The Sullivan siblings drove away from the Ashwood House as the afternoon light grew golden. The tires crunched over gravel, then found the main road. Neither spoke for a long while, each replaying the night's events, feeling unreal yet etched in their minds forever. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "Claire, about what happened last night, what we saw." She placed a hand on his arm gently. "I know. It was real. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in years, Mark allowed himself to feel the grief of their mother's death and the weight of their family's history. He blinked back tears, Claire, resting her head on his shoulder briefly as he drove, offered him solace. They had faced the darkness and survived, and in doing so, had repaired something in their own relationship that had long been strained by unspoken fears. As the car rounded a bend, Ashwood House vanished from the rearview mirror. Claire let out a long breath. "Do you think he'll ever find peace?" she asked softly, referring to their grandfather's angry spirit. Mark was quiet for a moment. "I hope so," he said. "Maybe Grandma will help him, wherever they are now." Claire nodded. She liked to think of Rose guiding Thomas into the light, forgiving him for whatever sins kept him bound. The alternative, that his spirit remained in the attic forever, mad and vengeful, was too grim. However, she couldn't help but imagine in her mind's eye that back at the house, a curtain moved in the upper window, as if a person unseen watched them leave. And for a brief second, the pale face, Thomas's gaunt visage, pressed to the glass. But as the Sullivan siblings drove further away, heading toward a new dawn, that face melted back into the shadows. For now, the house then truly fell silent. The cycle of anguish that had gripped it for generations was broken at last, or at least suspended. On the road ahead, sunlight broke through the trees, and Claire cracked her window to feel the fresh breeze. It felt like a blessing, the cool wind of freedom. Mark reached over and squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back. Whatever lay ahead, be it healing or nightmares from what they had endured, they would not face it alone. In the distance, thunder rumbled one last time, but it was moving off, leaving clearer skies behind. Ashwood House stood quietly against the horizon, a silent witness to both the sorrows of the past and the courage of the living. And though its shadows still held echoes of yesterday's ghosts, new light had begun to pierce the darkness, one ray of hope at a time. After exploring a tunnel with a dark and terrifying history, a couple soon learns that their home has been invaded by an uninvited darkness. The presence toys with them, but in due time, it would reveal the true horror of its nature. Will they survive, or will the abyss take them? This is the true and terrifying story of Candace and John St. Clair's haunting, which took place in Appalachia in 2010. And this one, as with most of the stories I've researched and covered on this channel, I wouldn't recommend watching this episode in the dark, unless you like looking over your shoulder and jumping at every small noise that goes bump in the night. Nestled on the banks of the Loviisa River and surrounded by the mountains of Appalachia, lies the small town of Grundy, Virginia, a place now known for community pride. It also has a dark history. From slavery to mine explosions and other accidents, these events weave a complicated web of despair. Despair that could have perhaps played a role in the story that I am about to tell. Candace St. Clair shivered despite the warm Virginia air as she and her husband John stood before the gaping mouth of an abandoned tunnel. A jagged arch of crumbling stone loomed over them, covered in streaks of moss and graffiti. The surrounding forest was eerily quiet, as if even the animals avoided this place. Creepy as hell, huh? John smirked, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam barely penetrated the tunnel's interior. It was swallowed almost immediately by thick blackness within. Yeah, let's just get this over with, Candace murmured, gripping his arm. Their friend Stacy had told them about the tunnel's legend, a story that intrigued the couple, but one that almost made them err on the side of caution. The story was that a wealthy man back in the 1800s had built this tunnel using slave labor. One night, he had caught one of the slaves with his wife. Angered at this discovery, he punished the slave responsible, and as a result, the other slaves had begun to rebel against him. In an act of rage and malice, the slave master then took the majority of his slaves and had them sealed within the walls of the tunnels, alive, forever encasing the human souls within the tunnel itself. The whispered stories of phantom voices in the dark, feeling unseen hands brushing against visitors, and worst of all, the belief that something unexplained lurked inside, watching and waiting for the unsuspecting. It was just a legend, they had told themselves, a story. But even standing at the entrance, Candace felt an inexplicable weight pressing on her chest. Candace adjusted the recorder in her hand. She had always been sensitive to the paranormal, and while John treated their ghost hunting adventures as a joke, she felt drawn to this place as if something was calling her. As they stepped inside, the temperature plummeted. Then, as John whispered a mocking, come out wherever you are," almost as soon as the words left his lips, a rush of chilly wind blasted past them, and the couple believed that they had heard a series of whispers, ones that were just beyond their ability to make out what they were saying. Candace's stomach twisted. They weren't alone. Frightened, she then asked John to leave. That night, when they returned home, things felt off. Their new house had felt warm and inviting, but that night, the air inside felt stagnant, damp, and heavy, like the inside of a tomb. It felt smothering, as if an unseen weight pressed against their chests. The couple had recently purchased and moved into their home, which was located on the outskirts of town, just close enough to town for errands, and just far out enough for peace. And things hadn't at all felt this way before. Deciding that perhaps their nerves were getting the best of them, the couple, along with their daughter, decided to lay down for the night for some much-needed rest. But as the moonlight cast its shadow upon the rocky exterior of the mountains surrounding them, and nocturnal predators hunted their prey, perhaps a different hunter of sorts now also stalked its prey within the walls of the St. Clair home. Their 5-year-old daughter, JC, tossed and turned in her sleep. She seemed to be calling out to someone or something. Her cries caught the attention of her mother, who quickly got out of bed herself and began to head toward her room. However, when Candace entered her room, expecting to see her daughter laying in her bed, perhaps having a nightmare, she instead found the little girl sitting straight up in bed. She was staring at the corner of her room by her closet. "Sweetie," Candace whispered, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" JC turned to look at her, blinking slowly, as if waking from a dream. "The man in the tunnel is here, Mommy." Candace's blood turned to ice. They had not taken JC with them to the tunnel, nor had they mentioned it to her or around her. Following that night's events, JC would have nightmares night after night. She would say that the man from the tunnel was there with her, and it scared her. Accompanying these nightmares, the young girl also soon started sleepwalking, oftentimes startling her parents awake in their own room by standing next to their bed with a glazed look in her eyes. But when she'd be asked by her parents what she was doing, she wouldn't be able to remember what had happened. Trying to play off the mention of any man from the tunnel, they figured their poor daughter was just struggling to get used to a new environment. That perhaps the stress of the move, alongside other changes, had caused this sudden development. That she would get used to things in due time. Perhaps she would, or perhaps not. With her husband working on a project in the basement, and her daughter at dance practice, Candace, who sewed pageant clothes for JC in her spare time, was doing so one evening. As she toiled away on her sewing machine, the calm rhythmic hum was abruptly shattered by a deafening crashing noise that echoed all throughout the house. Unsure of just what on earth the sound was, with her heart hammering inside of her chest and her adrenaline surging, she made her way from the upstairs sewing room down the stairs, apprehensively checking all around with each step as she descended. She then heard it again, the sound of glass breaking. It seemed to be originating from the kitchen, but just what or who was doing this? As she approached the kitchen, she would be shocked by what she would find. Before her very eyes, every single cabinet door stood open. Their contents, her dishes, lay in shattered remains on the floor. Bowls, plates, and cups of every kind lay in pieces everywhere, scattered as if someone or something had removed them from the cabinets and with great force threw them down with incredible impact. In her own words, every single cabinet door was open, and every single dish I had was broken. I didn't have a plate or a glass left. Everything I had was completely smashed. That was, except a small decorative plate that was on display there in her kitchen. However, before her very eyes, she watched as it began to move on its own, wobbling back and forth. It then flew across the room towards her and shattered on the wall next to her. With her daughter and husband nowhere near the general vicinity and in a state of shock, Candace screamed for her husband. Hearing the cries of his wife, John soon arrived by her side from elsewhere in the house. He too couldn't believe what he was witnessing, asking her just how this happened, with her telling him that she came downstairs to this. His mind immediately thought that there could perhaps be an intruder within the home. Quickly going into protector mode, John began sweeping the house. Not only did he not find anyone, but all of the doors and windows were still locked. This just further added to the mystery. JC, who has continued to struggle with nightmares and apparent sleepwalking, has begun sleeping with her parents in an effort to quell everyone's fears. A few nights later, following the kitchen incident, as the moon hung high over the St. Clair residence, Candace wakes up out of a sound sleep. The air in the house felt heavy and damp yet again. She was sweating, and there didn't seem to be any circulation in the air. Getting up to turn on the air conditioner, she walks down the stairs and towards the thermostat on the wall at the bottom. Wiping sweat from her brow, she then reaches out to turn it on and adjust the temperature of the house, when all of a sudden, she felt a hand grip her wrist. In her own words yet again, "I felt something grab my wrist, and I knew my family was asleep upstairs." My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, and there was nothing there. I was terrified. I looked down the hallway, and I didn't see anything. There was nothing there. I thought, am I going crazy? Am I just really sleepy? I wasn't sure. So, not knowing what to make of the bizarre experience, she slowly starts walking back up the stairs. Still scared, but certainly unsure, she decides that this time she'll keep the experience to herself. But whatever force that seemed to lurk in the shadows was far from finished. Over the next several weeks to come, Candace continues to experience strange manifestations within her home. Things that begin to make her second-guess herself and question her own sanity. One night, while John is at work, Candace puts JC to bed in her own room this time, or so she thinks. As she folds laundry downstairs, she hears her daughter still awake. Heading back upstairs and approaching her room to tell her that it's time for bed, she instead comes face to face with nothing. The room is empty. Then, from behind her, she begins to hear multiple things that are very odd, to say the least. She begins to hear the sound of her daughter giggling and laughing from the other room. And as she walks towards these sounds, she begins to hear something else. The sounds of labored, heavy breathing. Continuing to follow the sounds of her daughter's laughter, she finds herself approaching her own bedroom. Upon opening the door, thinking her daughter is playing some sort of trick on her, she instead finds her fast asleep in her and John's bed. Unsure yet again what to make of this very unnerving experience, she turns around and quietly shuts the door behind her. After doing so, she takes several steps down the hallway toward the direction of the stairs. The lights begin to flicker. Looking around, slightly disoriented at first, she finds her eyes landing on a figure at the end of the hallway. This figure is much too large to be a man. It stands at least 10 feet tall, and at first, given its distance from her, it appears dark as the night. However, as it begins slowly and menacingly walking towards her, she starts to make out horrid features. In Candace's own words, this thing was huge, easily 10 feet tall. It had horns and scales. I began to freeze. It's like everything froze. My thoughts and everything. There was just this one moment of absolute silence. Time stands still briefly, and then you're jerked back into reality, and then you go into survival mode. As the creature gets closer to her, she makes out its abhorrent and terrifying features. It then, staring at her with jet black eyes, protruding teeth and horns, reaches towards her with clawed hands. Almost as soon as it makes contact with her skin, a scream erupts from her lips. She is touched, but not by this creature. Instead, her screams are interrupted by her husband, who has found her screaming at the end of the hallway in front of their bedroom door. In John's words, "I had worked late that evening, and when I had got home, I found her like that, and she was incredibly upset, asking his wife, Candace, what's wrong? She then tries to explain what she had seen and experienced, but words can only do so much. With first their daughter's night terrors, then their dishes being broken, and now this. She believes that there is something here in the house, and that she may have just seen what it is. John, however, feels differently. He just thought his wife may have been having a bit of an emotional breakdown, not only from being overworked, but with him having to oftentimes work long hours. He thought maybe she just needed a break to recuperate. But Candace knows what she saw. She tells him, "You know what? You can take it or leave it, but I know what I saw, and I know that there's something in this house. There's something going on here that's deeper than either of us can imagine, and I don't feel safe here anymore." This event proves to be a diverging event for the couple. Following it, Candace finds it hard to confide in her husband, and the two grow distant. One afternoon, shortly after Candace had seen the creature, she was measuring her daughter for a new pageant dress in the family living room. John, who was off work that day, was watching TV. Occasionally, the TV had done strange things, such as cycle through the channels, emit a loud, high-pitched noise, or turn itself on and off without any involvement of the remote or the physical pressing of buttons. It started doing this again as the three were in the room together. Believing it to be an electrical short within that part of the house, John dismisses the TV's strange behavior. He then goes and unplugs it as it's cycling through the channels and making the high-pitched noise. The screen then goes black. As he gets back up to head to get some of his tools to take a look at the wiring, in front of all three of them, the TV turns back on, with JC asking just what the television was doing as Candace and John stare in bewilderment at it, for it's on and acting erratic, and with no power source at all at that. Neither of them know what to tell her, or even what to say for that matter. Finally, after a few seconds that feel like hours, Candace breaks the silence. She says, I don't feel safe here. We need to leave." She then tells JC that the two of them are going to go to the park. In her own words, "That was my breaking point with John. He was looking around and thinking, what do I check now? Because he had checked everything, and the TV was on without being plugged in." Several weeks would pass by after this event, and the once happy couple had further drifted apart. Their once thriving marriage and relationship were practically non-existent. Communication had broken down, and a blanket of sorrow now covered them all. One night, as John had some beers downstairs by himself while his wife and child slept upstairs, Candace is suddenly and brutally woken up by large clawed hands strangling her. She can't scream, and she can't breathe. She's then thrown from her side of the bed to the other. As she rolls, gasping for air, she looks up and sees what she describes as a gargoyle-like creature, the same one she had seen in the hallway a good while ago now. Its skin was like leather, its eyes were black as the abyss, and its face was semi-human in appearance. She would later say that while she was in that moment, I felt as if this thing had taken everything else from me, and now it was going to take my life. All I could think about was that I'm going to die. I'm not going to be here anymore. My family isn't going to have me anymore. And it was the most terrifying feeling imaginable. Now off the bed and her back against the bedroom wall, the creature once again comes after her. As John sits downstairs, he is soon called to action when he hears the shrill screams of his wife upstairs. Rushing to their bedroom as fast as he possibly can, he finds Candace crying out in pain and in a ball on the floor. After helping her back onto the bed, she tells him that this creature attacked her. She then, wincing in pain, lifts up her shirt to reveal 3 long and huge, bleeding scratch marks across her stomach. John doesn't know what to make of the situation. Candace is now far past the point of trying to convince him that something is haunting their home. She instead puts her faith in her higher power. But after reaching out to dozens of churches and religious organizations and having no help or the offer of assistance from any of them, she knows that it's up to her to fight this battle for the sake of herself and her family without their assistance. After doing research on the internet, she puts together a list of specific prayers and gets several bottles of anointed oil. She then, after a deep breath, begins the cleansing of her house. She goes room to room, putting the anointed oil on each doorway and calling out from her Bible for God to clear the home of any negative beings that could be there uninvited. From the back of the house to the front, she is cleansing and reclaiming her home. Following her efforts, she immediately notices that the environment as a whole feels so much lighter. The air seemed fresher and easier to breathe. In the coming weeks, this would continue to be the case. But in the back of her mind, she was frightened that whatever this entity was could potentially come back. Life for a time seemed to go back to normal for the St. Clairs, and although weary, they all tried to resume their normal day-to-day activities. That was until one solemn night. John is in the bedroom, changing his clothes after a work day, when he soon gets the sneaking suspicion that someone is watching him. Turning around and expecting to perhaps see his wife standing in the room, he is instead greeted by something very different. In his words, it looked like a person in the face, but it was distorted. It had these long horns and teeth and these scales. It just kept getting closer and closer to me. And the closer it got to me, the hotter I got. Now sweating profusely, with the creature mere inches away from him, it then points its clawed finger towards his chest. And within seconds, it's holding his beating heart. as he stands there, petrified with fear and struggling to breathe. This creature is just staring back at him with black eyes, holding his heart. John suddenly wakes up out of a dead sleep. Thankfully, it was just a dream, albeit a horrible one at that. After calming himself down, which takes several minutes, he finally lays his head back down to try and rest again. But when his head hits the pillow, he then starts hearing footsteps from somewhere else in the house. With his adrenaline surging and already on the edge from his nightmare, he quickly gets up to investigate. Peering out into the hallway, he sees nothing. With Candace still asleep in their bed, and now checking on their daughter, she too is asleep. Continuing to hear footsteps downstairs, he slowly makes his way down to the base level, further fearing what he may find. Glancing around at first, he sees nothing yet again, but turning back after looking behind himself, he is suddenly face to face with a massive figure. Its skin is rough and cracked, like aged leather stretched too tight over jagged bones. The eyes were pits of blackness, voids that seemed to drink the light around them. It didn't move, and it didn't blink. It only watched. But in an instant, with incredible speed, it surged toward him and grabbed him by his throat with its gnarled, clawed hand. In John's words, "In the blink of an eye, it grabbed my neck and lifted me straight up and off the ground. It seemed like it was letting me know that it was there, that it was in control, and I wasn't." Then, almost as quickly as the attack had begun, it was over. John was thrown to the ground, discarded like garbage. As he lay alternating between gasping and screaming, Candace soon rushes to his aid. The touch of her hand on his arm causes his adrenaline to spike, and he shoots up to the sitting position. Then, realizing that it was his wife and not that thing, he begins to apologize profusely. After validating one another, with John now absolutely convinced that there is something malevolent and paranormal dwelling within the walls of their home, the St. Clairs know that they must try and seek help immediately. Together, they begin researching and eventually come across the Southern Highlands Paranormal Investigation Group. Upon speaking with one of its members, a man named Stacy Kuchner, the group soon agrees to come and conduct a formal investigation of the property. Upon arrival, Stacy and one of his colleagues decide to conduct a series of questions to whatever force may be lurking there, using the flashlight method in conjunction with an audio device in the hopes of capturing EVPs or electronic voice phenomena. The flashlight method is that one places a flashlight upright on a table and asks the spirits to reply using yes or no responses through turning off and on the light. For a good while, the team is unsuccessful in making any sort of contact. However, upon asking if whatever stalked the family had followed them from another place, the flashlight suddenly turns itself on. A follow-up question is then asked: "Are you a malevolent force?" The flashlight once again lights up. These questions and the following frighten and confirm what Candace and John already knew. The final question is: "Are you demonic or non-human in nature?" To which the flashlight, once again, brighter than ever, illuminates the room. Stacy then tells the couple that it's important that they try and figure out why this entity followed them and from where, in order to try and rid themselves of the attachment. Candace tells him that ever since she was little, she seemed to be able to sense certain things, almost as if she's in tune with the other side. This is not information she has ever shared out loud before with anyone. Believing that Candace could perhaps be sensitive to the paranormal, and upon further inquiry, the couple remembers the tunnel all those months ago. With this information, Stacy thinks that it's possible that a demonic entity may have attached itself to Candace while they were there, due to her abilities. In Stacy's words, due to all the evil that had taken place there, and also due to its secluded nature, it was really a prime breeding ground for something dark to manifest itself. Someone who is psychic may inadvertently be open in a spiritual sense, and must be extra careful when traveling to different locations, because any negative forces may realize their presence and seek them out, leading to attachments. Believing the presence to be demonic, he tells the couple that they must cleanse the home immediately, that only good can conquer evil. In the coming days, he puts them in contact with a Catholic priest that he has worked with in the past to come and bless the home. Upon the priest's arrival, he debriefs the family. He tells them that they must be in solidarity with one another and with him. He hands them prayer cards to assist him with the cleansing itself. Then, all together, they begin to pray. They call upon Saint Michael the Archangel and ask for his assistance in ridding the home of demonic forces. At the end of the blessing, the house feels better to everyone, lighter, as if whatever dark force that had infested their lives had perhaps been vanquished. In the coming months, the family slowly begins to slip back into a life of normalcy, one they had craved, but had almost all but forgotten. Beauty pageants, closeness, and love had returned. One day, as the St. Clairs get ready to go out to dinner, Candace tells JC to quickly finish getting ready while standing outside her room. JC is sitting on her bed with one of her toys, facing away from her mother. Almost as quickly as the phrase exits Candace's mouth, she hears her daughter reply to her, but not from the top of her bed, in front of her eyes, but rather from behind her, at the bottom of the stairs, with John. Confused because she was hearing and seeing her daughter behind her, but also seeing her daughter in front of her, Candace tells JC to stay with her father. The JC sitting before her then slowly begins to turn its head towards Candace. In her words, this child's face was almost hazy, like blurry, as if there was something missing. As the being stares at Candace, its eyes begin to turn a familiar black color, just like the very same light-absorbing abyssal spheres that had belonged to the demon that had plagued them just months ago. It then vanishes. But as it does, Candace hears the scream of her daughter at the bottom of the stairs. Rushing down to her, it quickly becomes apparent that she has a long and now bleeding scratch across her face. This was the last straw for the St. Clairs. It was horrible enough that the demon had attacked the two of them, but to attack their child, they could no longer handle it. Although the demon could potentially follow them, they decide to take their chances. Seeing no other alternative, the family abandons what was supposed to be their dream home. leaving behind all of their belongings and fleeing with just the clothes on their backs. In the months to come, the family would find another place to live. Fortunately, although they believed that the demon had attached itself to Candace initially, they now believed that it had attached itself to the home because no further activity plagued them. No more horrendous manifestations, day or nightmares, or hellish attacks. Although I did my best to try and find an update on the family, I wasn't able to find out exactly how they're doing now. But I hope wherever they are, that they are safe and truly no longer tormented by the demonic. I'm not sure if they still own the original home in which the case took place, but I do know that following their departure, as soon as 2016, the house has remained vacant. In the aftermath, Candace and John turned their frightening experience into a calling. They founded a group called Spirit Seekers Paranormal Investigation Research Team in 2012, aiming to help other families deal with hauntings. This is their team's website, spiritseekersteam.wixsite.com. By forming Spirit Seekers, the couple sought to do more than document ghostly activity. They wanted to actively seek and help remove evil entities and protect others from suffering like they did. During their own experiences with their haunting, Candace discovered she had a spiritual gift, and as previously explained, they believed that the demon targeted her because she is sensitive to the spirit world. She has since embraced her role as a psychic medium, becoming the team's resident medium. Candace is described as a medium psychic and a magnet for paranormal activity who can communicate with spirits and help them move on. This marks a dramatic personal change from haunted victim to healer as she channels her gift to ensure others don't have to flee their homes like she once did. Before we go, I did want to share some of my thoughts on the case as a whole, in no particular order. I do think it's possible that the demon followed them from the tunnel. The tunnel, along with many others in that area, and really the area as a whole, has a lot of dark history associated with it. I think Stacy said it well when he said it seemed to be a breeding ground for evil. I think that traumatic events, like the legend the St. Clairs were originally told by their friend that prompted their interest in going in the first place, could very well have attracted a creature of hell, in my opinion. It always amazes me how often husbands don't believe their wives, or have to literally be mauled by an entity in order to believe that what they've been told is actually taking place. Referring to John and many others in cases I've covered, it's not always the case, but it certainly occurs enough that it's become a bit of a trope in these stories. I also find it interesting how Candace was experiencing these daymare-type experiences with the demon. The way she describes time essentially standing still, as if she's entered a different plane of reality, or is frozen in her own time, while this entity is in proximity to her. I've heard of this in other cases, and figured it was worth mentioning, because it truly is interesting. I've heard about this in other cases, and figured it was worth mentioning. It is also very interesting that Candace's cleansing, as well as the priest's, ultimately both didn't work. Albeit they both seemed to stave off the demon for a short period of time, but they didn't banish it altogether. I wonder personally if they tried any other methods or belief systems, or if they would be open to doing so if they still own the house. Also, I'm curious if they dealt with a mimic, considering it masqueraded itself in various forms throughout their experiences. The whole concept of mimics terrifies me personally. There's just something about it that's just creepy. There are many questions with this case, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Please also give this video a like, share it around, and subscribe with notifications on. If you want to further support the channel, consider picking up one of my books or some merch at mysteryarchives.myshopify.com, where you can use the code MASALE for 15% off your entire order right now. You can also check out my Patreon or support the channel through the YouTube membership program here. And please also check out my new podcast, The Ghost and Me, here on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if it's on Apple or Spotify, please give it a 5-star rating if you like it. Other than that, guys, I apologize for the wait on this one. I wanted to craft a story and video that I'd be proud of. And over the course of this last week, I have just had a lot of personal things going on and things to do with my family, and I just was not in the right space mentally to be able to do that. But thankfully, we overcome as we do, and all around, I hope it was worth the wait. I appreciate you guys. This community as a whole is amazing. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives, and I'll see you soon with another brand new video. Make sure to stay safe out there, and take care.